The dog that shouldn't be alive walked into FBI HQ with a child no one reported missing. The receptionist didn't know what to say. A German Shepherd ribs showing eyes alert had pushed through the revolving glass doors of the FBI's Denver field office. Clutched in his jaws was a child's torn hospital blanket, and behind him, a little girl, barefoot, eyes blank, holding on to his tail like it was the last safe thing in the world. No one had reported her missing. No local hospital claimed her. She didn't speak. But the dog never left her side. Agents thought it was a fluke until they tried to touch her, and he growled low. Not wild, not vicious, protective, controlled. Then came the first clue. A scar behind his left ear military-grade chip. That's when Special Agent Nora Vance whispered, "Where the hell did you come from?" And that's where this story begins. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly above the marble floors of the Denver FBI field office. A sound so constant and forgettable that no one noticed it until something felt off. Special Agent Nora Vance, age 40, veteran of 2 federal task forces, walked through the metal detectors just as the morning light slanted across the glass facade, spilling gold onto the polished white corridors. Her badge clicked against her hip as she moved measured. No rush, but her eyes, sharp beneath the quiet curve of her brow, scanned the hallway like a woman who had learned long ago that calm didn't mean safe. She nodded to the front desk officer and took the coffee from the break room with her usual 2 creams, no sugar. As she passed the bank of monitors near the security annex, something made her stop mid-step. 3 alerts. Perimeter sensors. North, east, and then west side each, about 6 minutes apart. She tilted her head. False alarms happened. Wildlife, delivery trucks, even glitchy software. But 3 isolated pings, each from a different direction, and timed almost perfectly, wasn't just a blip, it was a pattern. "Garza," she called to the technician sipping soda at his console, "why are the motion alerts cleared already?" The young tech tapped his keyboard, eyes widening. "They self-resolved. Auto-flagged and dismissed by the system. I didn't touch it." Nora frowned. "That's not protocol. Show me playback." The screen flickered. Grainy, black and white feeds rolled one after another. What she saw made her breath still, not from fear, but from the pure wrongness of it. There was movement, a blur, low to the ground, 4-legged, moving with a gait too smooth to be random. The camera picked up a flicker of a harness, a patch something like K9 lettering, barely readable. Then it disappeared out of frame. No guards reported anything unusual. The doors hadn't logged an unauthorized entry. Yet, Nora sipped her coffee again, slower now, but the taste had gone bitter in her mouth. She leaned closer to the screen, heart pacing behind her ribs. There was something chilling about the way the figure moved, not chaotic or wild like a stray dog. It was controlled, intentional. She turned away from the monitors, tension creeping under her skin like ice. She didn't have the whole picture yet, but her gut, a thing sharpened by years of working counterintel and organized crimes, was already whispering. Something is coming, and it's already inside. 12 floors down, in the main atrium, the glass doors slid open with a soft hiss of hydraulics. The receptionist looked up from her screen, expecting another agent, a courier, maybe a delivery of catered sandwiches for the briefing scheduled in Conference B. Instead, what she saw made her gasp audibly. A German Shepherd, massive and dirt-streaked, stepped through the threshold as though he belonged there. His eyes were the color of sun-scorched amber, scanning the space with alertness honed not by instinct alone, but by training, real, professional training. He carried something across his back. A limp shape. A child. Nora was just stepping into the elevator when the building's emergency system crackled to life with a tone she hadn't heard since a lockdown drill 6 months ago. Not fire, not seismic. Breach protocol. She didn't wait for the floor count. She bolted down the stairwell instead, her boots pounding marble as she reached for her sidearm out of reflex. Though something deep in her told her this wouldn't be that kind of threat. At the foot of the stairwell, Officer Raj Patel, red-faced and breathless, met her halfway. "You need to see this," he said, chest heaving. "I know," Nora replied, already pushing past him. When she stepped into the lobby, a hush had fallen. All eyes were on the center of the room. Federal agents, analysts, even the janitor with his mop mid-swipe, no one moved. There, seated like a stone sentinel in the marble glow, was the dog. His body rigid but calm, his breathing steady. And on his back, nestled between what remained of a torn tactical vest, lay a little girl barefoot, blonde hair tangled with dried blood, legs dangling against the dog's flank like a rag doll forgotten in a war zone. She couldn't have been older than 7, and she was very, very still. Nora didn't speak for a moment. Her training took over. Eyes cataloged everything: wounds, posture, exit angles, agent positions. She crouched slowly, lowering her body until she was no longer looming. The dog didn't snarl, but when one of the guards stepped forward with a walkie, he let out a low, warning growl, deep, calm, unflinching. Not scared. Protective. Nora raised a hand gently to the guard. Back off. The girl's legs bore what looked like tiny IV bruises. There were marks around her wrists, faint and cruel. But what chilled Nora was the glimpse beneath the hem of the girl's dress. Precise surgical incisions, still red and inflamed. And the way the dog sat directly between the girl and the nearest agent spoke volumes. He had brought her here, not by accident, not in fear, by purpose. Check surveillance, Nora murmured into her radio. I want to know how he got in. Already rolling it back, came a voice from above. He walked through the service corridor, past security cams. Not one sensor flagged him. Why not? I don't know, the agent admitted. But it looked like he knew exactly where to go. The dog's eyes met Nora's then steady, unblinking. She had seen that look once before on the face of a Marine pulling a wounded soldier from gunfire. It wasn't wild. It wasn't animal. It was deliberate. And in that silent moment between them, something settled in her chest. He didn't just come here to escape. He came to tell us something. The alarm wasn't supposed to sound like that. It cut through the Denver FBI field office like a serrated knife. Low, mechanical, insistent, not fire, not seismic. Something else. Something alive. Special Agent Nora Vance was already in motion before the final tone faded. Her coffee abandoned on the third-floor counter. Still steaming. She bypassed the elevators and sprinted down the stairwell 3 steps at a time. It wasn't the alarm itself that set her off, it was the timing. The sensors had glitched earlier, and now this? Her gut had a way of whispering long before the mind could process it. She knew that whisper well. Something had breached protocol, and it had chosen the front door to make a statement. When she reached the lobby, the air felt too still, too heavy, like the moments before a verdict. Several agents stood frozen in place, weapons drawn but not raised, forming a loose, uneven circle around the heart of the room. Nora's boots echoed on marble as she crossed into the open, scanning faces for clarity but finding only unease. Then she saw it, and her breath caught. In the center of the polished atrium, beneath the flagpole and the 2-story skylight, sat a German shepherd. Big, battle-worn. His coat was streaked with dirt, ash, and something darker that crusted near the hind legs. His tactical vest was torn, scorched at the seams. But still visible across the faded fabric were ghosted letters K9 Tactical Unit, half obscured, but unmistakable. And on his back, slumped against the thick ridge of his shoulders, was a child. A girl, maybe 7 years old. Blonde, barefoot, dressed in a faded pink nightgown, stiff with dried blood. Her arms hung limp, head tilted sideways, one cheek pressed against the dog's neck, like a crumpled doll. She wasn't moving, but she was breathing shallow, steady. Nora slowed her pace. The shepherd's eyes found her at once. Amber. Alert. Not feral, not desperate calculating. He tracked her as she approached, but didn't move otherwise. Anyone scan them yet? She asked, low and calm. No microchip in the girl, one agent said. Dogs chipped. Reading comes back military encoded. Access restricted. Nora raised her brow. Restricted? Like Black Ops restricted. Her gaze snapped back to the shepherd. Has anyone touched her? She asked softer now. The agent shook his head. Every time someone gets close, he growls. On cue, a junior officer stepped slightly forward with a thermal scanner. The dog didn't bare teeth, didn't bark. Instead, it released a sound so controlled, so deeply mechanical, it felt rehearsed, a precise surgical growl from somewhere deep in the chest. A warning, not a threat. The young officer froze. The dog's gaze didn't blink. Nora held out a palm. Back up. She crouched at a careful distance, placing herself directly in the dog's line of sight, but avoiding eye contact. Her voice dropped to a whisper. One she hadn't used since talking down a bomb-strapped veteran 3 years ago. "Hey, big guy," she murmured. "You made it here, didn't you?" The dog didn't move. "You brought her," she continued. "You got her past checkpoints, past 3 rings of security, and you didn't run, you walked." The tail shifted once. Just once. A flicker. The closest thing to a yes she'd ever seen from a silent witness. Nora edged slightly to her left. The dog's ears rotated, following her. But again, he didn't shift his weight. That's when she noticed something: his stance. The girl wasn't just riding him. She'd been positioned with balance, her arms tucked in, her back draped evenly. There was no blood trail, no drag marks. The dog had carried her, carefully, deliberately. And now, he sat guard like a stone lion, daring anyone to come closer with anything less than pure intent. "Vance," came a voice in her earpiece. "We just reviewed entry footage." He walked through the employee gate near the east loading dock. "That door needs badge clearance and facial recognition." It opened for him. "Excuse me?" she whispered. "I'm telling you, it opened like he belonged here." She studied the girl again. Her limbs bore signs of restraint, ligature marks on the wrists, faint but fresh. On her legs were surgical cuts, not random gashes, but clean incisions, precise, practiced. Just beneath the left hip, a small red puncture mark, likely an IV. Nora felt her stomach knot. This wasn't a domestic abuse case. This was medical and organized. She reached into her pocket slowly, retrieving a protein bar. Not as an offering, but as a prop. A reason for her hands to move slowly, predictably. "You're not just protecting her," she whispered to the shepherd. "You're placing her, delivering her." No tail flick this time. But the dog blinked once, and then, with almost ceremonial gentleness, he shifted, lowered his body in stages first, his forelegs, then easing down his hips. The girl barely jostled. She slid gently from his shoulders onto the cool marble, her breathing unchanged. And then the dog did something Nora would never forget. He turned away from her, not to flee, not to hide, but to place himself between her and everyone else in the room. He lowered his head and stayed still. "Get medical down here," Nora said into her radio. "Now, I want pediatric trauma, not EMTs. I want a full, clean team. We have a child victim and an unknown canine asset." She didn't care if it made sense. Her gut had seen enough. As the medical unit arrived, they advanced cautiously, hands raised. The lead paramedic held up gauze first, then the oxygen mask. The dog stood but didn't lunge. Instead, he nosed the paramedic's wrist, sniffed the mask, then stepped back, granting access, but not permission to linger. When one medic tried to roll the girl too quickly, the dog let out another growl, barely audible, but enough to freeze the man mid-motion. "Slow," Nora instructed. "He's not a threat, he's a barometer. Treat her like glass." As the trauma team worked, the dog stayed at the girl's side, never touching her, never leaving her, just watching. Eyes scanning every hand, every needle, every voice. He wasn't broken. He was operating. And Nora, despite everything she thought she knew about instinct and protocol, felt something ancient settle in her chest. He wasn't just a dog. He was a messenger. And this, whatever it was only the beginning. The marble was cold beneath the child. Nora could feel it even from where she knelt, its stillness like a slab in a morgue. But the girl, she was breathing. Shallow, fragile, rhythmic, like something kept barely alive by force of will or chemical sedation. Her hair was a tangle of blonde and copper. Not from natural coloring, from blood-dried, sticky, oxidized to a brown crust at the edges where it clung to her scalp. One of the paramedics lifted the hem of her nightgown. and the room exhaled all at once. Not a wound, not a scrape. Surgical incisions, 2 of them, 1 on each leg, just above the knee, delicate, sharp, and symmetrical. Not jagged, not chaotic, but practiced. The kind of cuts made by a gloved hand in a sterile room under harsh white lights. Nora's jaw tightened. "Jesus," someone whispered. But she didn't reply. She was locked in, focused not just on the girl, but on the silent sentinel beside her. The German Shepherd had lowered her gently, like placing something sacred down on an altar. And now he sat again slightly behind her, slightly to the right, eyes locked on every movement of the humans around him. No barking, no twitching, just watching. Nora had seen guard dogs before. She'd worked with tactical units and bomb sniffers. Patrol K-9 Second, trained to take down a man twice her size. But this was different. This wasn't obedience. This was intention. "Vitals are steady," the lead medic said. "Pulse weak but holding. BP low. Pupils responsive but slow. We need to get her upstairs for full trauma screening." "Wait," Nora murmured. She reached forward, voice low. "Check her wrists." The medic paused, then rolled up the sleeve of the girl's nightgown. There they were, faint bruises, almost perfect half-moons in shape, circling each wrist like invisible shackles. Ligature marks, likely restraints, not from rope, from plastic. Something tight enough to bruise, but not cut. 4 entry site on the left arm, another medic noted. Small gauge, recent. "And her ankles," Nora added. She was carried, but check anyway. Aye. They lifted the fabric of her nightgown near her calves, and again, discoloration. Restraint lines, barely faded. "Is she chipped?" Nora asked. The team scanned her with a wand negative. "She's not. No ID tag, no medical bracelet, nothing. A blank slate, or more likely a child meant to disappear." Up above them, the surveillance tech's voice crackled through Nora's earpiece. "Agent Vance, I've got footage from the East checkpoint. You need to see this. Talk to me." Dog entered at 9:13. AM door unlocked itself on proximity. No badge swipe, no guard interference. He moved down the hallway past 3 active checkpoints, never tripped a single scanner, walked like he knew the way. Nora's breath caught in her throat. The child stirred slightly, and the dog shifted instantly, one paw lifted, angled slightly toward her body, as if ready to brace, to steady. Not once did his eyes leave the nearest medic. "He walked in like he belonged?" Nora asked, quiet. "More than that," the tech said. "He walked in like he'd been here before." She stared at the dog now. His ears perked slightly at her voice. There were burn marks near his hindquarters. One of his claws was broken, likely from asphalt or concrete. His left flank had a patch of fur missing, revealing a healed scar in the shape of a curved C surgical. Maybe a previous field wound. Or something else. But it was the vest that undid her. Tattered but intact, the patch on the side still bore faded letters, almost too faded to read. But not to Nora. K-9 Tactical Unit. Zephyr. The name hit her like a memory long buried. She had read that name before. A briefing report? An archived case? She couldn't place it, but it lingered like unfinished business. The dog Zephyr blinked slowly. And in that moment, Nora saw something she hadn't seen in years. Not since Kandahar. Not since she stood next to a young Marine while he held a bleeding canine in his arms and begged it not to die. She saw recognition. Not that he knew her, but that he knew exactly where he was and why he had come. Nora stood, slowly. Her voice, when she spoke, came out quieter than she expected. "He came here on purpose." The agents around her turned. She didn't need to convince them. The evidence was lying across the marble, pale and too still, yet somehow protected more fiercely by this one dog than any armed guard at the perimeter. And Zephyr? He didn't move, didn't nod or bark, but his eyes said it all. This wasn't escape. This wasn't random. It was a mission. One the agency didn't know existed until this very moment. The trauma team prepped to move the girl. Zephyr stood only when they did, placing himself at her side as the gurney was wheeled in. When the wheels squeaked slightly, the dog leaned forward, nose briefly brushing the girl's hand. The girl didn't flinch. She turned slightly, just enough for her face to be seen fully now. And even through the sedation, a tear rolled down her cheek, not from pain, from the absence of fear. As they wheeled her out, Zephyr stayed locked to her flank. The agents parted instinctively, giving him room. Nora didn't issue orders, didn't stop him, because deep down, she knew the same thing that girl did. Whatever this dog had endured, whatever he had seen, he was no longer taking orders. He was choosing his mission now, and that changed everything. The fluorescent lights above the trauma bay buzzed softly, like a whisper just on the edge of consciousness. Arya Lane stirred beneath the thin blanket, her lashes fluttering against pale cheeks, smudged with dried sweat and saline. Electrodes dotted her chest, and her right arm bore the faint red ghost of an IV removed only minutes before. Machines clicked and hummed gently near her bedside, but it was the quiet presence beside her, warm, steady, that seemed to hold her tethered to the world. Zephyr lay curled at the foot of the hospital cot, his massive frame half-tucked beneath the rails, his head resting beside her leg. He hadn't moved in over an hour, except to track the nurses with his eyes. Arya's fingers twitched first. Then a small breath escaped her lips, shaky, dry. A second later, her eyes opened. They were hazel, soft and distant at first, pupils sluggish as they fought to adjust to light and reality. She blinked slowly, her brow furrowing at the ceiling. And then she felt something pressing lightly against her calf. She looked down, and the moment their eyes met hers and Zephyr's, everything in her changed. Her body, stiff with fear, relaxed just a fraction. Her breath caught in her throat, but it wasn't a gasp. It was a recognition. Not like seeing a dog. More like seeing a memory that had been waiting for her to come back. Nora Vance had been standing in the doorway the entire time, arms crossed, her badge clipped low on her belt, jacket still on. She hadn't blinked since the girl stirred. When Arya finally turned her head toward her, Nora softened her posture. "Hey there," she said gently, like she would to her nephews after a bad dream. "You're safe. You're at the FBI." Arya blinked slowly. Her lips moved, but no sound came. "That's okay," Nora added. "You don't have to talk. You don't have to do anything right now." Zephyr lifted his head slightly and rested it on the mattress. Arya's hand, as if moving on its own, reached toward the thick fur behind his ears. Her touch was weak, but intentional. Nora stepped in slowly, pulling up the padded visitor's chair. "I'm Agent Nora. Do you remember your name?" The girl hesitated. Then, with the barest voice, a whisper like breath against a mirror, "Arya." Nora nodded, holding back the ache in her throat. "That's a beautiful name." For a few seconds, there was only the soft beep of the monitor beside them. Then Arya whispered, "Is this real?" Nora leaned forward slightly. "Yes, sweetheart. It's real. You're here. And no one's going to hurt you." The girl didn't answer, but her eyes slid back toward Zephyr. "He brought me." "I know," Nora said. "We've never seen anything like it." She watched Arya stroke the dog's fur, slow, grounding movements. Each pass of her fingers seemed to remind her that the nightmare hadn't won, that whatever monsters had tried to swallow her whole hadn't finished the job, that maybe, just maybe, she had made it out. "Arya," Nora said after a long pause, "can I ask you just a few things? You don't have to answer if you're not ready." Arya nodded slowly, still petting Zephyr. "Do you know how long you were away?" The girl's brows knit together. She looked toward the IV mark on her arm and then down at her legs. She touched her wrist where the restraint marks were still faintly visible. 6 nights, she said, as if guessing. Nora's heart clenched. That was how children remembered time, by absence of stars, not calendars. "Do you remember where they took you?" Arya's lips trembled. "It was cold." "Outside?" She shook her head. "Inside." Nora leaned forward. "Can you tell me more?" Arya's eyes drifted toward the ceiling, unfocused, as if looking back into the dark. It smelled like metal and bleach. A pause, and there were lights, big ones. They hurt to look at. "Were you alone?" Another shake of the head. "There were other kids. One boy cried a lot. He had curly hair. They said he would go next." Zephyr let out a soft exhale. as if echoing the weight in the room. Nora kept her voice even. "Do you remember the people? The ones who took you?" Arya's face tightened. "They wore masks. Gloves. One of them had a scar here." She pointed to the space between her thumb and forefinger. "He said, we were lucky. That people were waiting." "Waiting for what?" Nora asked. Arya shrugged, tears starting to well. "I don't know. He said we'd sleep soon. That it wouldn't hurt." Nora reached out gently, placing her hand near but not on Arya's blanket. "You don't have to remember everything now. You've already helped more than you know." Arya looked down again, at Zephyr. "He didn't bark," she whispered. "He just came in. They thought he was theirs." Nora tilted her head. The girl's jaw trembled, her fingers curled into Zephyr's fur. "After he saw what they did, Zephyr shifted again, rising slightly to place his chin over Arya's hip, like a bridge between her pain and the world. Nora's voice lowered, filled with something she hadn't used in a long time: awe. "Arya, I don't think he just brought you out." She met the girl's gaze. "I think he chose to save you." The girl closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to protect the fragile memory blooming behind her lids, the memory of a monster who turned out to be a guardian, of a dog who was supposed to obey but chose to protect. And in that silence, in the faint hum of machines and morning light filtering through the sterile blinds, Nora saw it. The beginning of healing, born not from therapy, but from loyalty without words. The room had grown quieter now. Arya had drifted into a light doze, not quite sleep, but the kind of half-conscious stillness that came after exhaustion had wrung every last drop of fear from a child's body. Zephyr remained where he was stationed at the foot of the bed, head up but unmoving, watchful. Nora stood at the bedside with her hands resting lightly on the rail, not speaking, not questioning anymore, just listening. There was something sacred about the silence, a hush earned, not given. But then she saw it, something clenched in Arya's right hand. It was small, half hidden beneath the folds of the blanket. Nora leaned in gently, careful not to startle her. Arya's fingers had curled around it instinctively in her sleep. Nora looked closer. Paper, crumpled, smudged, speckled with dried blood. Nora gave a soft whisper. "Arya, sweetheart, I'm just going to take a look at what's in your hand. You can keep holding it if you want, okay?" The girl stirred, barely nodding, her fingers loosening just enough. Nora carefully pulled the slip of paper free. It was torn on one side, as if ripped from a larger note or journal. There were faint fold lines, too, even too deliberate for a child's scribble. But the ink across the center was unmistakably Arya's. Jagged, urgent, written with a hand that trembled. "Help us." 2 words. Pressed deep into the paper. The S had trailed off, like it had been written just before hiding it, or before everything went dark. Nora's throat tightened. She held it under the pale room light and stared at it a moment longer, not just what it said, but when it must have been written. Before the dog, before the escape, before she was saved. This wasn't a message meant for the FBI. It was a last chance, a breadcrumb, a hope. Dr. Corinne Talon arrived minutes later, wheeling in a compact cart with trauma documentation tools. At 44, she had spent most of her professional life tending to the wounds that didn't always bleed. Her hair was pulled into a soft bun, and the lines around her eyes weren't from age, they were from bearing witness. "She awake?" she asked softly. Nora nodded. "Dozy." A few words. "She trusts the dog more than us." Corinne glanced at Zephyr, and he returned the look with calm intelligence. She gave a quiet nod of approval. "Good. That's already better than most." She moved to Arya's side, speaking gently as she adjusted the bed's angle. "Hey there, Arya. I'm Corinne. I work with kids like you. Just here to make sure you're okay." The girl stirred, eyes barely open. "Where's Nora?" "I'm right here," Nora said, stepping closer, showing her face. "Not going anywhere." That seemed to settle her. Zephyr stood and repositioned himself, his flank now brushing against the lower mattress rail. Arya's hand reached for him blindly, and he offered his paw in return, silent, grounding. Corinne began her examination slowly, checking vitals, touching pressure points, reading the bruises like a road map. "She's undernourished," she murmured, "but hydrated. That means they were keeping her alive, not neglecting her." Her hands moved gently over the girl's legs. The surgical cuts, nearly invisible now that the swelling had receded, stood out to a trained eye. "These aren't injuries," she said. "They're incisions, precise, deliberate." Nora's heart sank. "Organ harvesting?" Corinne nodded grimly. "Pre-op, lower incision, standard prep for kidney retrieval. But there's no post-op scarring. They didn't go through with it. Something stopped them." Her eyes flicked to Zephyr. "Or someone did." Arya's voice came in a whisper, slurred around sleep. "There were lights." Corinne paused. "What kind of lights, Arya?" "Big. White. They buzzed." "Buzzed how?" "Like bugs. They hurt my eyes." Nora knelt beside her. "Do you remember where you were? What the room looked like?" Arya blinked slowly. "Cold. Like a freezer." "Were you alone?" She shook her head. "I heard crying. A little boy. He said his name was Teddy. He was 5. Did you see him?" Arya nodded faintly. "They made us wear bracelets. Like at the hospital." "What did yours say?" Corinne asked. "El. Tre." Nora glanced up. "Like a code?" "Maybe. Or a cue." Arya began to cry softly, hand still buried in Zephyr's fur. "They said it wouldn't hurt. They said we'd go to sleep and wake up better. But the masks lied. They always lied." Nora squeezed her own wrist beneath the table, an old habit when the room got too heavy. "They told us not to fight," Arya whispered. "But Hero," she looked at Zephyr. "He didn't listen. He waited. Until they weren't looking. And then he opened the door." "Opened it?" Nora asked, surprised. Arya nodded. "He pushed the red thing on the wall, the big button, and it made the noise, the alarm. And then he bit the man." She buried her face into Zephyr's side, her body trembling now. Corinne stopped writing. "That's not instinct," she whispered. "That's planning. That dog was reading the room." Nora took the crumpled note from her pocket again, held it out to Corinne. The doctor's eyes scanned the words. And then, softly, she said the part that changed the tone of the room. This wasn't abuse. This was logistics, timing, organs, patients, customers. She looked at Zephyr, at the weight in his shoulders, the heat in his eyes. This wasn't just a rescue. This was an intervention. Arya fell asleep soon after, curled against Zephyr's chest like a heartbeat trying to find rhythm again. Nora stood back, arms folded, her voice tight. Someone thought they could use a dog like him for transport. That no one would notice. That kids too young or sedated wouldn't remember. She looked again at the paper. "Help us." 2 words, but enough to start a war. The rain began just after dusk. It came in soft sheets against the tall windows of the recovery wing, painting long gray streaks across the glass. The room where Arya slept was quiet now, machines humming in low, reassuring tones. Nurses had dimmed the lights and drawn one curtain to keep the chill from the windows from reaching her bed. But she hadn't asked for blankets. She hadn't asked for dolls. She'd only asked for him. The dog lay beside her, stretched across the floor like a monument. His body formed a quiet half-moon against the curve of the hospital bed. The IV pole stood like a sentinel just behind him, and his head rested near Arya's knee, close enough for her hand to find him even in sleep. He hadn't moved in hours, except when the door opened. And when it did, even slightly, his ears rose before the handle turned. Every time, Nora noticed that first. She had stayed for hours after the trauma consult, watching from the corner chair, scribbling only the barest notes, observing him more than anyone else. Not a pet. That word would have insulted what he was. He didn't wag, didn't pant or nuzzle, didn't look for praise. He simply watched. Every movement from the nurses, every shift in Arya's breathing, every beep from the monitor, his eyes flicked toward it with precision, calculated, controlled, like a soldier listening for distant gunfire. It reminded Nora of a Marine sniper she once worked with, a man who could fall asleep against a wall but awaken the second a leaf moved wrong in the wind. That's what this dog was. A weapon once. Now something else entirely. Arya stirred under the blanket. Nora leaned forward, just a little, setting her coffee on the tray table without a sound. The girl blinked slowly, her voice still raspy from sedation. "Is he still here?" Nora smiled gently. "Hasn't left your side." Arya turned her head, and Zephyr lifted his chin, not quickly, not excitedly, but with the quiet certainty of someone answering a name that hadn't yet been spoken. The girl reached down and placed her small hand on his snout. "He's my hero." "And Pross?" Nora raised an eyebrow. "Hero?" Arya nodded. "I don't know his name. They never said. But he's mine now." For a long moment, no one said anything. Rain traced the window pane like tears that had no heat behind them. Just the rhythm of a world that kept moving. "Hero?" Nora repeated softly, testing it out. It didn't feel wrong. Not at all. But it didn't feel complete. Later that evening, after Arya had fallen back into a deep, dreamless sleep, Nora walked out into the hallway and leaned against the wall just beside the door. A nurse passed her a clipboard for signature, and she scrawled her name without really looking. Her mind was elsewhere. Back in that marble lobby. Back to the moment he entered. "You knew exactly where to go," she murmured under her breath. The footage had been played a dozen times already. Zephyr walking through the East employee corridor like he had a badge and a mission briefing. The doors opened as if recognizing him. Security didn't blink. Cameras didn't flag him. But he walked straight. No hesitation. No sniffing or pacing or circling. Straight toward help. Straight toward them. Back in the room. Zephyr stood up silently and adjusted his position. He placed his two front paws delicately on the edge of Arya's bed, never fully climbing. Just enough to place his chin beside her small arm. He didn't move again. Just waited. Dr. Corinne entered quietly a few minutes later and stood next to Nora at the door. "You see it too?" she asked in a low voice. Nora nodded. "Yeah." "He's not just guarding her," Corinne whispered. "He's mirroring her. Every breath, every shift, like he's trying to keep her tethered." "He won't even drink unless she's awake," Nora said. Corinne glanced over. "You know how rare that is, right? Even for trained dogs." "I don't think we're looking at training anymore," Nora replied. Corinne's eyes narrowed. "Then what?" "Choice," Nora said. "This dog, he's not following command prompts. He's following her." Arya stirred again, murmuring in her sleep. Zephyr's ears flicked once. She whispered something barely audible. Nora stepped forward. "Don't take him," the girl mumbled. Nora crouched beside the bed. "No one's taking him, sweetheart." Arya opened her eyes slightly, frightened. "They tried before. They said he'd go back, that he was theirs." Nora gently brushed a hair from her forehead. "He's not theirs anymore. End of Tane." Arya clutched Zephyr's fur, her small fingers twisting just enough to make him glance up, but he didn't move away. "He stayed because I asked him to," she whispered. "Even when the loud man yelled, he stayed." Nora swallowed hard. 7 years old. Already learned that loyalty is a gift most people don't keep. But this dog? He had risked everything just to bring her to safety. And now, he refused to leave. As Zephyr lay back down, his head never lifted again that night. Not when the night nurse entered. Not when the IV beeped. Not even when the overhead lights dimmed to blue. Only once did he stir again. When Arya said, barely above a whisper, "Good night, hero." And for the first time since he stepped into the building, his tail moved. Just once. A quiet sweep across the floor. The sound of a promise made. And kept. Hospitals at 3 a.m. held a kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful. It felt clinical. Like a pause between heartbeats. In room 417B, the low hum of machines and the intermittent beeps of monitors formed a soundtrack of survival, subtle, constant. No alarms, no chaos, just the breath of a sleeping child, and a dog who refused to rest until she did. Zephyr lay on the floor beside Arya's bed, his body still, but not relaxed. He wasn't curled, he wasn't dozing. He was watching, one paw, extended, resting lightly against the white sheet where Arya's hand had fallen. The touch was deliberate, just enough contact to confirm she was still there, still safe, still breathing. His eyes were open, not wide, not tense, but active. They flicked from the door to the windows, then to the baseboards, then back to Arya, every 20 seconds. Exactly. Nora had started counting. She sat across the room in the visitor chair, her boots off, coffee cold. She hadn't left since the night shift started. Partly for Arya, mostly for him. Because there was something about the way this dog scanned a room. Not for food, not for affection, for threats. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't on edge. He was doing what soldiers did after deployment, locating exits, tracking movement, mapping survival. Dr. Corinne entered quietly, holding a tablet and a clipboard. Her sneakers barely made a sound on the linoleum, but Zephyr's head rose the moment her shadow breached the doorframe. His ears lifted. His nostrils flared once. His pupils contracted not out of fear, but calculation. He didn't growl, didn't stand, just assessed. Still watching, Corinne murmured, nodding respectfully toward him as she moved inside. Nora kept her voice low. Every 4 to 5 seconds, his eyes do a sweep, never random. He's plotting distance and egress. Corinne crouched near the end of the bed and took a slow breath. That's not instinct. That's conditioning. Zephyr's gaze locked on her for a moment, then released. A subtle, nearly imperceptible drop in tension. He allowed her closer. He has protocols, Nora said quietly, not taking her eyes off him. Waits until someone proves they're not a threat. Corinne set her tablet down and leaned in, her voice just above a whisper. I've worked with therapy dogs. Bomb detection 9-second. PTSD companions. But this one, she tilted her head. This one thinks. Zephyr lay his head back on his paws, his eyes never leaving her face as she adjusted Arya's foredrip. He tracks eye movement, she continued. Not hands, like a house dog. Not feet, like a guard. He watches the face first. That's tactical. Nora nodded. You think military? I'd bit my license, Corinne said. She reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a folded sheet of paper. I did a print scan from the pad on his front left paw. The ridge pattern was faint, but it matched up with an archived ID tag from a retired military K-9, designation Zephyr. Nora looked up sharply. You're sure? Corinne opened the file. 3 combat tours. Final deployment in Kandahar. Injury in the field. Deemed unfit for continued service after retinal damage to the left eye. Was supposed to be euthanized and retired to Nova Canine Trust. She glanced down at the dog. But something tells me that didn't happen. Nora exhaled slowly. He was reassigned, she said, without going through proper federal channels. Which means someone falsified the release records, Corinne added, and moved him off grid. They both stared at Zephyr in silence for a long moment. The dog shifted his weight slightly, not to relax, but to keep his body between the door and the child. Nora stepped toward the bed. Zephyr's eyes followed. I want to try something, she said. She crouched near the foot of the mattress and reached slowly into her jacket pocket. From it, she pulled a soft blue cloth, a bandana. It wasn't much, just something her brother's kid had tied around their retriever's neck last 4th of July. But it smelled like home, like not here. She held it toward Zephyr. He sniffed, paused, then turned his head back to Arya. No interest in objects, Corinne observed. Even familiar ones. He's detached from everything but her. Nora nodded. Hyper-focused loyalty. Makes sense. Which brings us to the harder part, Corinne said gently. Which is? Corinne hesitated. At some point, we're going to have to separate them, even temporarily. She needs full-body scans, psychological intake, court evaluation, and She glanced at the dog, whose eyes flicked toward her again. He's not a certified medical animal. Not anymore. He saved her, Nora said. I know. He's stabilizing her now. I know. She hasn't screamed, hasn't cried out, hasn't had one panic tremor since he came back into this room. Corinne folded her arms. I'm not saying take him away. I'm saying, what happens when we have to? They both looked toward the bed again. Arya had shifted in her sleep. And now, without opening her eyes, she had turned toward Zephyr, her hand searching the sheet blindly until it landed on his paw again. Her breathing settled, and Zephyr exhaled. A slow, deliberate sigh. The kind soldiers let out after a standoff ends, not of relief, of confirmation. The room was safe. For now. Nora rose to her feet and looked down at the dog, not with pity or admiration, but with something quieter. Respect. You still think you're on mission, don't you? She whispered. Still scanning for enemies. Still waiting for the next breach. She crouched once more, looking him in the eyes. And what stared back at her was not an animal. It was a soldier with no uniform, no nameplate, and no orders left except the one he gave himself. Protect her at any cost. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead didn't feel clinical in Sublevel. 2 of the Denver field office, it felt cold, almost sterile, like the room had been frozen in time to preserve the discomfort of those who had sat too long under its glare. Agent Nora Vance leaned over the desk terminal, her fingers moving slowly but purposefully across the keyboard. No caffeine, no music, no idle chatter, just the glow of the screen and the steady building of dread. The terminal she accessed was air-gapped, reserved for classified asset reviews, the kind of place where dogs had file numbers, training logs, and discharge protocols. She typed in what little she knew: K9, Tactical Vest ID, Zephyr, and waited. The first result came up as a gray file: restricted access, obsolete tag. But Nora had clearance level 5 behavioral unit with backdoors into most DoD K9 data. She entered a second override code and leaned back as the screen flickered, then pulled up a digital personnel dossier. Knoin 745a. Zephyr. Breed: German Shepherd. DOB: the 14th of March, 2016. Handler: Sergeant Caleb Merrick, Massachusetts RSOC. Afghanistan. Deployments: 3. Discharge status: medical retirement. Date: retired, the 3rd of March, 2023. Status: adopted by Nova Canine Trust. Date of final transfer: the 6th of April, 2023. Nora narrowed her eyes. Something felt off. She clicked deeper into the handler history. Sergeant Merrick had been killed in an IED blast during Zephyr's final mission. The file noted that Zephyr had survived the blast with non-lethal trauma and was medevaced back to a field base 2 hours later. But it was the next line that stopped her cold. Recommended: active duty reassignment, special comm operations. Override: unfit, compromised loyalty. Signed: Lieutenant Colonel Andrew D. Weston. Compromised loyalty? She murmured aloud. Dogs didn't go AWOL. They didn't break ranks, unless they had a reason. She clicked again, this time opening the post-discharge adoption file. The document was short. Too short. A 1-paragraph summary with generic language. Zephyr was placed with a certified nonprofit rehoming agency, Nova Canine Trust, with intent to transition into civilian therapeutic support services. No further government oversight required. And then, signature: Director, Nova Canine Trust, A. Viscari. Address: 1200 Crenshaw Avenue, Jackson, Wyoming. Contact: 307-555-0938. Nora picked up the secure landline and dialed. Disconnected. She tried the second number listed on the now minimized adoption agreement. Also dead. She opened a browser on the agency's internal research server, searching Nova Canine Trust. The first page returned a polished nonprofit site cached in an archived snapshot. It had patriotic hues of navy and gold, testimonials in neat block quotes, smiling photos of elderly veterans walking hand in hand with service dogs in meadows. But when she clicked the live URL error, 404, gone. No redirect. No update notice. Wiped. She searched domain registry records. The license had expired 5 weeks ago. Something churned in her stomach. Not fear. Recognition. She'd seen this before: nonprofits that looked clean on the outside but were shell companies, created to funnel assets without detection. She pulled up tax records. The IRS EIN number listed for Nova Canine Trust matched 3 other inactive organizations, all with different names but identical board members, 2 of whom had passed away years ago. Nora swore under her breath. You weren't adopted, she whispered to the screen. You were stolen. She turned back to Zephyr's file and read through the behavioral assessments. Each mission detailed, each injury documented. In Fallujah, he saved a Marine's life by dragging him from an ambush. In Kandahar, he had detected a triple-stack IED 30 seconds before a convoy rolled through. In his final mission, witnesses claimed Zephyr refused to leave his handler's body growling at evac medics until the team commander physically carried him away. The next assessment noted that he displayed signs of hyperattachment and directive resistance. The phrase echoed in her mind. Hyperattachment. Not a defect, a decision. Back in the recovery room, he had refused to let go of Arya's side. Not because someone told him to, but because he had chosen her. Nora sat back in her chair, fingers drumming lightly on the desk. The transfer to Novo was a lie. The signatures were fabrications. The license had lapsed, and the trail had been swept before anyone came looking. But someone hadn't counted on the dog finding his own way back. She opened a new secure case file. Subject: Knoencephalstatus. Recovered. Condition: unknown reprogramming. Possible asset reclamation. Flag 4. Homeland, DOD. Military Intelligence Oversight. In the remarks, she typed slowly. Zephyr did not forget his training. He outgrew it. This is not a disobedient animal. This is a soldier who rewrote the mission. She paused, then added, possible link to child trafficking operation. Investigate further. Just before she shut the file, she opened one final tab and entered a personal override code into the internal FBI facial recognition system. She uploaded a still from the footage Zephyr walking into the FBI atrium carrying Arya on his back. She waited. The match came in seconds. Camera log. The 29th of April, 2023, 2:44 a.m. Zephyr alone seen on street surveillance, emerging from the alley of a known safe house under investigation for trafficking minors. He looked up at the camera and walked on, straight, without hesitation, toward the only place he thought he might be believed. The door to the FBI's veterinary forensics lab clicked shut behind Agent Nora Vance, sealing her inside with the scent of alcohol wipes, ozone, and sterile steel. The space was colder than the rest of the building. Not just in temperature, but in energy, a place built to answer questions no one ever wanted to ask about animals that were once heroes. She stood behind a reinforced glass wall, watching as Dr. Jude Halbrook, the agency's lead forensic vet, moved silently in a blue lab coat, latex gloves snug around his hands. Laid out on the table in front of him were the standard instruments, scanners, chip readers, bioflash memory interfaces. And in the center, completely still, sat Zephyr. He let me sedate him, Jude said, his voice calm but impressed. Didn't flinch when the needle went in. Just looked at me, like he'd seen worse. He has, Nora murmured. Jude turned slightly, pulling on his mask. You wanted microchip analysis, firmware traces, data logs. I ran the full spread, and I found something you're not going to like. Nora stepped forward. Show me. Jude tapped the screen beside him, and Zephyr's biometric profile popped up. K9 to 745A. Assigned: Marsoc, per Hector NDR. Sergeant Caleb Merrick. Status: deceased. Date of death: the 10th of April, 2023. Cause: complications following trauma. Induced aggression. Nora stared at the line for a long moment. Declared dead, she said. 3 weeks after discharge. Jude nodded grimly. Signed by a field technician from Nova Canine Trust. The record says he was humanely euthanized due to combat stress and advanced retinal damage. But we know that's not true. Jude raised a brow. Because this dog is standing in your building? Nora crossed her arms. Because this dog carried a child across a city and walked past 3 layers of security, like he still had top clearance. Jude clicked into the microchip firmware log. A timeline lit up timestamps showing routine veterinary updates until a sudden data spike 6 weeks ago. See that? He said. This chip is a DOD spec encrypted unit. Normally, firmware updates are administered by certified field officers or authorized medical contractors. But this update didn't come from them, Nora said. Nope, Jude replied. The logs were altered. Someone spoofed the keychain signature, wiped the original firmware, and injected new code. That's why Zephyr didn't ping alarms on your perimeter sensors. He looked over at her. His microchip told every scanner in this building that he was cleared. Nora's jaw clenched. How many people could pull that off? Jude leaned on the table. Someone with access to a government contractor database, K9 chip protocol keys, and the know-how to reprogram a service animal like he's a drone. He gestured toward Zephyr. But you already know he's not a drone. Nora's voice darkened. Number. He's a veteran, a warfighter. Someone tried to rewrite his instincts to turn him into a tool. She stepped closer to the table and looked at the dog's still body, now breathing steadily under sedation. His paws were scarred. His flank bore a hairline surgical stitch she hadn't noticed before. Not from combat, from modification. There's more, Jude said, pulling up a second screen. It displayed 2 separate canine profiles, both registered to the same microchip number as Zephyr. Dual identities, he explained. First one is legit. The second is labeled as Zeke, registered to a private security firm based out of Arizona. Nora narrowed her eyes. What firm? Peregrine Risk Solutions. She blinked. That name had come up on a flagged donor list connected to Nova Canine Trust. She grabbed her phone and took a picture of the screen. So let me get this straight, she said. Someone declared this dog dead, wiped his military tag, re-registered him under a new identity, and reprogrammed his microchip to fool government systems. Jude nodded, and likely modified his sensory triggers to carry sedated weight without resisting. Sedated weight, she repeated, as if spitting the words out. Jude sighed. You said he carried a girl? Nora nodded. Perfect utility for movement, he said. Looks like a medical support dog. If he's trained to stay silent and calm, people wouldn't think twice. But he didn't just carry her, Nora said. He got her out. Jude looked up, voice quiet. Then someone taught him how to obey, and she's the one who taught him how to disobey. There was a long pause. Outside the window, the city lights flickered in the distance. Nora stared at the sleeping dog behind the glass and felt something shift in her gut, not just anger, but grief. Grief for what was stolen, not just from Aria, from Zephyr, from every dog in that database marked deceased with no body and no oversight. She turned toward Jude. How many other dogs are flagged like this? He hesitated. That's the worst part. If they spoof the logs correctly, you'll never find them unless the dog shows up again. She rubbed her temples. So there could be more. Jude nodded grimly. A lot more. Back in the observation room, Nora sat in silence and watched Zephyr slowly wake from sedation. His head lifted weakly, ears twitching, eyes bleary but present. The moment he realized he was still in the same room, still safe, he lowered his head again and pressed his paw forward, instinctively reaching for the side of the bed where Aria usually slept. Even in his daze, he was searching for her. And that's when it hit Nora like a punch to the lungs. They didn't erase him. They only tried. What was left, the part that still reached, still chose, still defied, was the part they could never program. She turned back to the screen and scrolled up to the line that read, Zephyr, status, deceased. And with a firm keystroke, she typed a single word beneath it. Correction. Alive. Is it? The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the city slick and colorless, like someone had drained the warmth from every street corner. Nora stood by the wide window of the FBI's third-floor recovery suite, watching headlights slide like ghosts across the wet asphalt below. Behind her, Aria sat propped up in bed, her knees tucked beneath the blanket. A tray of untouched oatmeal sat cooling on the side table. She hadn't spoken much since the last exam, but she didn't need to. She'd already said enough to change everything. He waited, she had whispered that morning, her voice fragile but clear. Nora had leaned in. Who waited? Aria didn't look up. Her hand rested on Zephyr's fur, idly curling and uncurling small tufts like a rhythm her body remembered better than language. The dog. My hero. He waited. For what? For the tattoo man to fall asleep. Now, hours later, Nora sat beside her again, recorder on the table between them, blinking its red light. Aria's words came slowly, like bubbles rising from a deep, cold lake. They made us be quiet, even the little ones. If you cried, they'd say you weren't ready yet, that you'd go last. One of the boys, he stopped crying. She swallowed hard, not because he felt better, but because they gave him a shot. After that, he didn't say anything ever again. Nora felt something inside her shift, but she said nothing, just waited. Aria's gaze drifted toward the far wall, unfocused. I heard them say Tuesday. That was the day, that they had to move us before Tuesday. I think I was first. Nora glanced at the calendar. Tuesday was the day Zephyr walked into the FBI lobby. I remember one man, Aria said, voice tightening. He had tattoos all down his arm. Snakes, red eyes. He gave hero commands. What kind of commands? Stuff like down, carry, and secure. He had a clipboard. He'd point at kids and tell the dog which one to carry. Nora blinked. And Zephyr followed those commands? Arya shook her head. At first, yes. He carried a boy once. But the next day, something happened. She gripped Zephyr's fur again. He saw something. I don't know what. But after that, he changed. He stopped listening. He just watched. Watched who? The men. The lights. The door. Nora leaned forward slightly. What happened the night you escaped? Arya's breath hitched, but she pushed forward. They gave me the shot. I could feel it. Like I was full of warm sand. Couldn't move. Could barely think. But I remember him. He came to my table. Zephyr? Arya nodded. He laid his head by my arm, and he waited. Didn't move, even when the man yelled. Her voice dropped lower. And then, the tattoo man fell asleep in the chair. His head rolled back. He was holding a bottle. She closed her eyes. That's when Hero stood up. Nora felt her pulse climb. What did he do? He grabbed my gown in his mouth. Not hard, just enough to pull. And when I didn't move, he pressed his nose into my ribs, like he was pushing me. You were still drugged? Yeah, but not fully gone. I could sort of move my feet. She took a breath. He dragged me off the table. Then he nudged the door latch. It clicked. I remember thinking, he knows how to open doors. Nora scribbled on her notepad, her handwriting uneven. What happened next? We went into the hall. It was empty. Dark. No alarms. Just buzzing lights. He led me. Around corners. Down a ramp. Through a loading dock. You remember the route? Arya shook her head. Not really. I was mostly being carried. I think he knew not just where the doors were, but when to pause. He stopped once, when a truck passed. Waited. Then kept going. How long did it take? Arya looked down. I don't know. It felt like forever. I fell asleep a few times. Nora stared out the window again, watching the water ripple along the sidewalk drains. He hadn't wandered. He hadn't stumbled into help. He'd planned it. Waited for the shift change. For the guard to pass out. For the drug to wear off just enough that Arya wouldn't die on the journey. And then walked 15 miles across a city. She turned off the recorder and stood. Arya looked up at her. Will they take him away? Nora froze in place. No, she said quietly. Not as long as I have anything to say about it. Good, Arya said, already drifting back toward sleep. Because I think he saved me. On purpose. Later that evening, Nora met with James Marino in the evidence room. The walls hummed with silent data screens, replaying camera angles, timelines, maps. In front of them was a projected path marked in red. It lines up, James said. Camera captures from gas stations and ATMs. About 10 miles of visual confirmation. He followed utility corridors and rail lines places with low foot traffic. No GPS? Nora asked. James shook his head. Not unless someone gave it to him, but that's the thing he avoided populated areas and stuck to back service roads, like someone running dark. Or someone trained to think dark, Nora muttered. She stared at the final dot on the map, the entrance to the FBI field office. 15 miles, sedated girl on his back. One of the most secure buildings in the state, and he walked right in. James turned to her. Still think it was coincidence? Nora shook her head. He chose us, she whispered. Then she looked up. And now we need to choose him back. The map unfolded on the operations table like a surgical drape. Red string, thumbtacks, and a glowing digital overlay tried to make sense of what only one living being truly knew the path Zephyr had taken in the darkness. Carrying a half-conscious child across a city not built for salvation. Agent James Moreno stood over it, one hand braced on the table's edge, the other scribbling on a legal pad. He was methodical, ex-military, logic over instinct. But even now, he couldn't help the feeling creeping into the back of his throat. 15 miles, on foot, with a child who couldn't walk. And no one saw it happen in real time. Nora Vance leaned over his shoulder, eyes scanning the tight circles James had drawn, each a zone of possibility, widening out from the FBI field office like a ripple in gray water. We've got timestamps from 3 cameras, James said, pointing. Gas station here at 5:22 a.m. Delivery depot here at 6:01. Then the train yard 7:15. After that, nothing. Until he walks into our lobby at 9:04. And in between? James shrugged. Blank spots. Either blind zones or he deliberately avoided cams. Nora rubbed her temples. We're trying to trace a route back from where he ended to where it all began. Exactly, James said, drawing a new arc. Assuming a direct path, average load-bearing speed on urban terrain, let's say 5 to 2 miles per hour, with rests, we're talking a 7 to 10 hour journey. At night, while carrying a sedated child, and avoiding detection, James added, which means either extreme luck or training, Nora finished. They stood in silence for a moment, both of them looking at the red lines like veins leading back to a still-beating heart, buried somewhere in the industrial sprawl of Denver. James picked up a satellite tablet, fingers dancing across the screen. I've cross-referenced his possible route with shuttered clinics, unlicensed medical suppliers, and any facility with industrial-grade refrigeration units. If we overlay that with Arya's memory freezer rooms, concrete floors, fluorescent lights, we've got 6 potential locations. He turned the screen toward her. All 6 marked within a wide 15-mile radius. Nora exhaled. That's still too many, and we don't have time to raid all of them. James tapped the center of the map. We're missing something. Cameras caught Zephyr in industrial zones, but he made choices that only make sense if he's prioritizing cover. Look, he crossed under the I-25 overpass here. That's not random. That's learned behavior. Nora's voice dropped. Military behavior. James nodded. He's moving like he's behind enemy lines. They both turned as the door to the Situation Room opened and Dr. Corinne stepped in, clipboard under her arm. He's up, she said. Lucid, no residual effects from sedation, and he keeps checking the hallway like he's waiting for something. Nora pushed away from the table. He's not waiting. Corinne raised an eyebrow. Then what's he doing? Recalibrating. Minutes later, they stood in the observation room. Zephyr sat near Arya's bed again, but not resting his ears, twitched every few seconds. His eyes flicked toward the windows. Restlessness, but not panic. Preparedness. He's not settled, Corinne said. He keeps looking for an opening. He doesn't want to stay here, Nora replied quietly. He wants to go back in the command center. Nora stared at the map again, then at the thick cluster of industrial warehouses along the north corridor. James, she said. What if we've been thinking about this backwards? How so? We've been trying to figure out where he started from here, looking back. But what if he didn't navigate away from danger? What if he navigated towards safety? James leaned closer. You're saying this wasn't survival instinct? Nora nodded slowly. This was a mission. He didn't run aimlessly. He ran with intention. The FBI wasn't a coincidence. It was the only place he remembered that was designed to help, not hurt. James was quiet a moment. You think he remembered us? I think he remembered what we stand for, what the uniform means, what the badge smells like, what a safe corridor feels like beneath his feet. James flipped his notebook, then paused. Wait a second. He rummaged through the case file box, pulled out a faded photo of Zephyr at an FBI K-9 demonstration years earlier, a tour for military outreach. The Denver field office's old eastern gate was visible in the background. Son of a... James muttered. He's been here before. Nora stared at the photo. Zephyr was younger, less scarred, standing beside a Marine in full uniform. The crowd behind him blurred, but the building, unmistakable. He remembered this place, she whispered. He brought her here because he knew. Then that changes everything, James said. Why? Because it means we're not just chasing shadows anymore. We have a witness. He looked at Nora, but he's not going to give us names, or directions, or maps. No, she said. He's going to give us steps. One at a time. James smirked faintly. We're about to follow a dog into a city full of locked doors, unregistered buildings, and armed criminals. Nora nodded, because he already walked it once. 15 miles of silence. 15 miles of blood and breath and willpower. And somewhere, beneath it all, a memory burned into muscle. The memory of where the darkness lives. In the briefing room, the overhead lights buzzed low, casting long shadows over the whiteboard filled with red lines and crossed-out addresses. Agents moved around with clipped purpose, but the center of gravity in the room had quietly shifted toward a single form sitting quietly near the door. Zephyr. Still. Watching. Listening. Not waiting. Remembering. Nora stood beside him, sliding the tactical chest harness over his battle-worn shoulders with quiet hands. The fabric whispered as it latched. No protest from him, just a slow breath, and a soft twitch of one ear when her fingers brushed the scar on his flank. "You good?" she murmured. He blinked once. Behind her, James Moreno paced like a caged tiger. "You're really doing this," he said. "We're going to follow a dog." Nora didn't look up. She adjusted the GPS tracker on Zephyr's collar and snapped it in with a soft click. James scoffed. "We have 6 possible sites, access to federal drone surveillance, 3 forensic analysts on standby, and you're throwing protocol out the window. Protocol didn't carry her out of that place." James stopped. Nora stood up slowly, eyes steady. Protocol didn't drag a child through 15 miles of city while she was half-conscious and bleeding. Protocol didn't choose the FBI office. He did. Zephyr turned his head, as if acknowledging the weight of the moment. Or maybe he just sensed the tension in the room the way he sensed a tripwire before it snapped. James exhaled sharply. "Fine. Let's assume he gets us close. What happens when we hit a locked gate or a dead end?" "Then we keep going," Nora said. "Because he will." She walked to the table and picked up the body cam unit, lightweight, matte black. It had been built for tactical officers no bigger than a deck of cards. But as she approached Zephyr again, there was something ceremonial about it, like pinning a badge on a silent partner. "This might itch a little," she whispered, securing the mount gently above his left shoulder. He didn't move, didn't flinch. He just stood up. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. He was no longer waiting. He was ready. The hallway outside was lined with agents and staff, some watching in silence, others stepping back respectfully. "Doctor." Corinne stood near the elevator, her clipboard forgotten against her chest, eyes glistening with quiet awe. "I've seen therapy dogs, bomb dogs, cadaver dogs," she murmured. "But I've never seen one lead." Nora gave a faint smile. "There's a first for everything." They exited through the east gate, the same gate from the photo Zephyr had once stood in, years ago, as a military canine with bright eyes and no visible scars. Now, the scars told stories, some seen, some not. Nora bent down one last time before they started. "You know the way. I'll follow." She unclipped the leash, not recklessly, but with intent. Zephyr began to walk. No hesitation, no circling, no confusion. Back in the van, James sat at the monitor station, the GPS tracker pinging every few seconds. Zephyr's chest cam showing concrete, curbs, street lamps, then a hard left into a narrow alley. "Well, I'll be damned," James muttered. "He's not guessing." "He's retracing," Nora said softly. "From muscle memory." It wasn't just about direction. It was about decisions. At every corner, he paused, not long, not wavering, but with a calculating stillness. His ears rotated. He watched light patterns, checked for motion, adjusted course based on sound and smell no human could register. James watched the feed in silence. "He's choosing routes with minimal exposure," he finally said. "He just skipped a main road and took a backlot behind a thrift store." Nora didn't respond. She was watching, too, but not just with her eyes, with something else. A few blocks later, the camera jostled slightly. Zephyr had stopped near a dumpster. For a moment, he sniffed the base, then nudged something with his nose. A sock. Tiny. Pink. Faded. "Zoom in," Nora said. The screen blinked. Threads torn. Blood stain near the toe. "That's Arias," she whispered. James looked over. "You're sure?" She wasn't wearing socks when she arrived, but she had one balled up in her fist when they bathed her. She must have dropped the other on the way. Zephyr had found it. Not because someone told him to, but because he remembered she had it. He kept going. Across cracked sidewalks, under chain-link fences, over a storm drain. Every movement had intention, a purpose. And still he paused every few minutes to look behind. Not out of fear, but to be sure they were still coming. As if saying, "You said you'd follow. Don't stop now." In the van, The route was being logged, second by second. "We're 10 miles out," James said quietly. "East Industrial Zone." Nora narrowed her eyes. "That's where 3 of the suspect properties are." James didn't smile, but he didn't doubt her anymore. "He didn't fail her," she said again, voice low. James looked at the screen, and for once said nothing. They weren't chasing ghosts now. They were following a dog with no voice but with a mission, one paw in front of the other, leading them back into the dark, to the place he escaped, to the children who didn't. The SUV moved through Denver's industrial corridor like a shadow without permission. It was the kind of morning that left no footprints, gray sky, thin light, and silence that didn't belong to any hour of the clock. The buildings they passed weren't broken enough to be ruins, but too empty to be alive. Rust clung to the fences like old guilt. Chain links rattled faintly in the wind. In the back seat, Zephyr stood tense, not barking, not whining, just watching. His ears twitched left, then forward. His nose bumped the glass every few blocks. A low vibration ran through his body, an energy Nora had begun to recognize, not as restlessness, but memory surfacing. "Talk to me," James said from the driver's seat, voice low. Nora didn't answer immediately. She sat beside Zephyr, notebook closed, eyes only on him. They came to a fork. To the left, a warehouse row. To the right, a gravel service road veined with old tire marks and cigarette butts. Zephyr shifted, not toward the obvious direction, but toward the road that didn't look like it went anywhere. He gave one sharp bark. Nora nodded. "Right." They turned. The tires thumped over broken gravel. A crow lifted off from a rusted shipping crate, startled into flight. The whole street smelled of copper, bleach, and time. Zephyr's body leaned forward like a pointer in tall grass. "There," Nora whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "He knows this." "Oh." As the SUV crept through a series of empty lots, Zephyr's behavior became more precise, slowing at intersections, nostrils flaring at the seams of alleyways. He barked again at a row of broken vending machines outside an abandoned textile building. James glanced back. "We passed those an hour ago." "No," Nora said, voice firm. "That one wasn't tagged with green paint before. He's leading us in a spiral. Not retracing. Tracking." James frowned. "Tracking what?" "Familiarity," she said. "Landmarks. Safe edges." "He's doing route verification?" Nora finally looked over. "He's a war dog, James. They don't forget the way home. They just wait for the mission to tell them it's safe to return." They passed under an overpass where trains used to run. On the right, a homeless camp lay still, tarps folded, fire pits cold. A woman peeked through a slit in a weathered tent. She didn't wave, just watched the dog. Zephyr met her gaze for a second, then turned away. It wasn't his first time here. Nora felt it like a pulse. This wasn't new ground. It was old pain retraced. "He's limping," James said quietly. Nora looked down. The limp wasn't sharp, but present. Subtle in the back left leg every 6th step, the paw hesitated. "It's the injury from Kandahar," she murmured. Scar tissues flaring in the cold. James blinked. How the hell would he still walk this far? Nora didn't look up. "Because he made a promise." Zephyr stopped near a loading dock. He sniffed at a pile of discarded crates, then sat, eyes focused, tail still. "What is it, boy?" Nora stepped out of the SUV and followed. She crouched beside the crates and found something half hidden in a corner, a child's sock. Pink, faded, smudged with soot. She swallowed hard. Behind her, James had already called in the coordinates. "Is this it?" he asked. Zephyr stood, walked 3 paces to a rusted manhole cover and placed his paw on it. Then looked back, not at the ground, at Nora. She froze. This wasn't a discovery. This was a request. They opened the hatch carefully. Beneath it, a stairwell carved into concrete walls lined with condensation and faint tracks of boot rubber. No lights, no markings, just cold air rising from the darkness. James reached for his weapon. "Looks like Hell's Basement." Zephyr didn't flinch. He started descending. Nora stopped him gently. "Not yet." She reached into her coat and clipped a new transmitter to his harness, then pressed her forehead gently to his. "Only if you're sure," she whispered. He didn't move, only blinked. Once, and took the first step down. Inside the van, agents monitored the feed from Zephyr's chest cam grainy, bouncing slightly as he descended. The first chamber was empty. Dust, a file cabinet overturned. Old packaging from surgical gloves. Then something else. Scratches on the wall. Vertical. 4 at a time. Small, like they'd come from little hands. The agent watching the feed cursed under his breath. Nora didn't speak. She just watched. Watched Zephyr lower his body, sniffing the base of the wall, staring at an air vent. Watched him turn to the left tunnel and bark once. Watched him choose a path like he'd been waiting to return, like he needed to. Outside, snow had begun to fall. Thin flakes, barely visible. But they caught in Zephyr's fur when he emerged again 20 minutes later, mouth closed, tail low, moving with a certainty that made the hair on Nora's arms rise. She opened the passenger door. Zephyr leapt in. No hesitation. No sound. Just those same eyes, looking at her like, "You know now. So do something." James started the ignition. "Where to?" Nora stared out the windshield, toward the rising dawn over Denver's fractured edge, then turned back to Zephyr. She saw the concrete in his gait, the gravel in his eyes, and in that silence she finally understood. He wasn't just remembering the way. He was making her see it too. The alley reeked of old grease and something harder to name. Concrete glistened with a thin sheen of oil. Rusted meat hooks lay discarded beside broken pallets, their tips dulled by time or use. A faded sign still clung above the dented roll-up door. Grayson Meats. Fresh since 1974. But the front had been boarded up since 2019. The city record said condemned. Zephyr didn't care what the record said. He stood still behind a green dumpster. Nostrils flared. Body low, not in fear, but in readiness. Nora followed slowly, her boots careful against the gravel. She watched as Zephyr circled once, then stopped at a steel side door. It was bolted shut, tucked behind industrial trash bins and an old vending machine filled with sun-faded chips. He sniffed. Then he pawed at the door. Once, twice, then pressed his weight into it. "He's found something," Nora said into her comm. James's voice crackled back. "We've got TAC 2 and 3 on standby. Give me 60 seconds. Zephyr didn't move from the door. He stared at it with an intensity that made Nora's throat tighten. Like he wasn't just detecting scent. Like he remembered what was behind it. A black van pulled into the alley without sound. Tactical agents poured out in tight formation mat helmets. Body armor, weapons raised, but eyes sharp. Nora held up a hand. "No flashbangs, no breach until we clear thermal." One of the agents scanned the building wall. "No heat signatures, no motion. Place is colder than the sidewalk." That didn't settle her. It made her colder. She turned to Zephyr. "Still?" she asked, barely a whisper. He sat. Didn't whine. Didn't bark. Just stared at that door, breathing slow. Waiting. When the lock was finally popped, it echoed too loud in the alley. The door swung inward with a reluctant creak. What greeted them was wrong. Not horrific. Not chaotic. Wrong. The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner. Surgical-grade bleach. The kind that didn't just remove blood, it erased stories. Nora stepped in first, weapon drawn. Zephyr followed close behind, nose low to the ground, body sweeping each angle like a soldier re-entering familiar terrain. James whispered, "This doesn't look like an abandoned meat plant." Nora nodded. "Because it's not." Inside, the corridor stretched farther than the building should allow. Everything was too clean. Linoleum floor, off-white walls. A row of doors lined each side, all shut tight. A plastic bin stood in one corner with sealed biohazard bags empty, labeled untouched. Zephyr stopped near one door and sniffed the baseboard. Then did something Nora hadn't seen him do yet. He whimpered. Not loud, not afraid. More like regret. She crouched beside him. "What is it, boy?" He didn't answer, of course, but his body turned slightly toward the left wall and his ears flattened. Not fear. Recognition. They began clearing the rooms one by one. Each was identical. Steel bed frame, white sheet, no pillow, a tray in each room, spotless. No personal items, no graffiti, no names, not even dust. It felt less like a hideout and more like a set. Something staged. By the fourth room, one of the agents stopped Nora. "Ma'am, I think this was operational until less than 48 hours ago." He pointed at the trash bin. Inside, a half-used four-bag and a surgical mask still damp with breath. "Why leave this behind?" James asked. Nora's jaw tightened. "Because they wanted us to know we just missed them." Zephyr veered right into a service hall, behind what had once been a butcher's cutting room. A large walk-in freezer stood at the end, door ajar. Not cold anymore. Power had been shut down. Inside, rows of empty metal shelves. Except for one. Nora stepped in and saw it. A child's drawing. Crude. Blue crayon on torn printer paper. A stick figure with big eyes and a dog beside it. Above them, a word spelled in shaky block letters. Zephyr. James stood behind her. They knew him. Or he was one of them. Nora folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her jacket. As they moved deeper into the facility, Zephyr grew increasingly on edge. He paused at every junction, scanning high corners. Tail rigid, breath shallow. He stopped near an elevator shaft. The power was cut, but the floor was scorched, like something had exploded at the base. Burn marks in a perfect circle. Nora knelt. Thermite. James raised an eyebrow. "Why use that here?" "To destroy something quickly," she said. "Hard drives, files, evidence." He looked around. They were sweeping the place after they left. "No," Nora said softly. "They were scrubbing it before we got here." A soft metallic noise echoed from deeper in the hallway. All eyes turned, weapons raised. But it was just a swinging light fixture still in motion from someone's earlier passage. Nora felt it in her gut. They were being watched, or had been. She turned back toward Zephyr, who was now seated, staring at a ventilation duct along the wall. Then slowly, deliberately, he lay down in front of it, head on his paws, eyes on the vent, waiting, like he used to do for Arya. Outside, the snow began to fall harder. A silence fell over the building like a breath held too long. Inside that silence was an echo of what had happened. A place too clean to be real, too quiet to be empty, and a dog with no badge, no handler, and no name carved into stone, but who never stopped tracking the truth. The elevator shaft was dead, burned out from the thermite charge, but tucked behind the industrial freezer, Zephyr found something else. He scratched at the concrete corner beside an empty utility cabinet. Nora stepped closer and ran her fingers along the metal paneling. It didn't feel right. "Check for hidden seams," she ordered quietly. One of the tactical agents approached, scanned the wall. His voice came back low. "There's a heat differential behind this panel." James frowned. "There shouldn't be any heat. The entire facility's power is down." "That's what I mean," the agent replied. "There's something insulated behind this, probably active until recently." It took 2 crowbars and 3 men to pry the false panel loose. Behind it, a narrow set of stairs descended into the dark. The air that rose to meet them was cold. Not naturally cold, regulated. The kind of chill meant to preserve flesh, not comfort. Nora drew her weapon. Zephyr didn't wait for orders. He took the first step down. The basement wasn't large, just wide enough for 3 rooms. Each room had 1 table, 1 cart, 1 monitor still blinking, still connected to a generator tucked into the wall. And in the center, under fluorescent lighting that flickered like a tired eye, lay 2 children. Both were sedated. 1 boy, 1 girl, no older than 7. Pale, breathing, but shallow. IV lines were already threaded into their arms, taped carefully. Pre-op markings traced sterile lines across their abdomens. Names were missing, but on the whiteboards above each bed was a number. Number 287B. Number 287C. Nora's hand trembled as she stepped forward. Zephyr growled softly, staying close but not barking. His hackles were up, but his movements deliberate, focused, as if he'd seen this before, as if this wasn't new to him. James stepped to the girl's bedside. She had long braids and freckles dotted beneath her eyes. A stuffed rabbit was curled in her hand, filthy, 1 ear torn, but she held it. Even in unconsciousness, her grip hadn't let go. James stared at it for a long moment before speaking. We were 6 hours from being too late. His voice cracked on the word 6. He didn't try to hide it. Nora looked over. "What do you see?" He shook his head, his jaw locked. I see logistics. Clean insert, anesthetics, prepped with surgical efficiency. No blood yet, but they were ready. Organ harvesting? She asked quietly. James nodded. Or black market research. Either way, they weren't going to leave these kids alive. The boy's monitor let out a weak beep. Low pulse. Borderline hypothermia. Nora checked the IV bag. It was halfway drained. No labels. Just a clear fluid. She called into comms, her voice steady but tight. 2 survivors found. Code silver. Repeat. 2 children. Sedated. Vitals present but unstable. We need medevac now. M. She placed a hand on the boy's forehead, cold and clammy. He didn't flinch, but his fingers twitched faintly. Zephyr moved to the corner of the room and sat, but he didn't relax. His ears flicked constantly, eyes on the hallway. When James approached him, the dog tilted his head, not aggressive, but not friendly either. He's guarding them, James said. No, Nora replied, her voice softer now. He's grieving. James blinked, and then he saw it. A stain nearly invisible beneath the steel cart. It had been mopped up, but the trace remained. Blood. And on the wall, behind the cart, someone had scratched a shape, not a word. Just a small handprint, child-sized, pressed into grime and then outlined crudely with something dark, maybe charcoal, maybe something worse. It wasn't a scream. It was a memory, left behind like the last whisper of someone who didn't get out. The EMTs arrived fast, but not fast enough for comfort. They lifted the children with practiced gentleness, wrapping them in warming blankets. Oxygen masks fitted, vitals monitored. The girl stirred faintly when her toy slipped. Zephyr stepped forward and caught it gently in his mouth, then laid it beside her on the gurney. One of the medics hesitated. Whose dog? James looked to Nora. And Nora, without hesitation, said, He belongs to them. The medic nodded, as if that answered more than it asked. Outside, snow still drifted across the alley. The last light of day had vanished, leaving the city soaked in a dull, frozen silence. The gurneys were loaded into separate ambulances. But Zephyr didn't follow. He stayed beside the stairwell, looking back, ears perked toward the door they had come through. He thinks there are more, James said. Nora's voice was a whisper. Maybe there were. She stepped to the wall beside the gurney and pulled out the drawing they'd found earlier in the walk-in. She unfolded it and studied it again. Blue crayon, stick figures, and something else she hadn't noticed before. In the bottom right corner, beneath the figure labeled ZEFR, was a series of numbers. 15.9. 4 Newton. 117. Coordinates? A child's attempt to remember something important? She didn't know yet, but she would find out. Before they left, she turned one last time toward the basement entrance. It felt like a tomb, sterile, silenced, almost proud of how little it revealed. She whispered, almost to herself, Someone wanted these kids preserved, not saved. James frowned. Why? She looked at Zephyr, still unmoving, eyes fixed on shadows beyond the light. And she answered not with logic, but instinct. Because this isn't about just one facility. It's about a system. And she glanced down at Zephyr, might be the only one who's seen all of it. The wind outside was sharp, scraping at the windows of the Denver field office. It hadn't snowed in days, but the air still carried the memory of cold silence. Inside, Nora leaned over her desk, the soft glow of 3 monitors bathing her in a pale light. The words on the screen blurred slightly from too many hours without sleep. But one phrase stood out like a bruise. Nova Canine Trust, giving heroes a home. A mission statement written in serif font, centered under an American flag, and the image of a smiling boy hugging a Belgian Malinois. It looked wholesome. It looked real. Until you clicked beyond the homepage. Websites hosted out of Jakarta, James said from across the room, scrolling rapidly on a secured tablet. But the registry address is a warehouse in Delaware. Empty. Nora didn't look up. And the nonprofit paperwork? He tapped a few keys. Filed under 501c3. Dissolved 2 years ago for lack of financial transparency. Last known director, a man named Garrett Frayne. Background, clean, too clean. No real digital footprint before 2019. Which is the same year Zephyr was marked as euthanized, Nora added, eyes narrowing. She clicked deeper into the server. Nova Canine Trust had donation links, social media accounts, even staged videos of reunited veterans and dogs. All stock footage, all fake names. Some of the dogs shown had scars too consistent, too identical to be coincidence. One of them, in a blurry still, had a tattoo just visible through a shaved flank. Alpha 79. Another ghost. What if it was never about rescue? Nora murmured. What if the whole sanctuary thing was a laundering operation? Take retired canines second, claim they're being adopted out, but instead reassign them. Sell them. James walked over and dropped a folder beside her. Inside, printouts from anonymous tips, fragmented vet records, and one internal memo flagged from a defunct military email domain. It read, "Confirmed transfer of subject K9, RZ14 to Nova Trust Holding. Behavioral modification incomplete. Proceed with off-grid placement." Nora exhaled slowly. They didn't just reroute them. They rewrote them. She sat back in her chair and looked at Zephyr, who lay by Arya's blanket on the couch in the corner. His head rested between his paws, but his ears twitched at every keyboard stroke. Always listening. Always watching. What they did, she said softly, was take a trained war dog and turn him into a smuggling tool. James replied quietly. Or, worse, a courier. Nora frowned. They strapped kids onto him, James continued. Used his training to bypass security. Like he was a delivery system, but more subtle than a truck, less obvious than a vehicle. Nora's mouth tightened. Because who questions a dog? They spent the next hour tracing the digital ghost prints. Nova had once claimed a facility in northern Colorado. On paper, it was a training site and retirement ranch. In reality, it was sold to a Shell LLC 6 months ago. The listed buyer was a defunct crypto startup based in the Cayman Islands. James threw his pen down. We're dealing with a web. Dogs, kids, shell orgs, medical equipment, fake vet records. They've been planning this for years. M and Zephyr slipped the leash, Nora whispered. She pulled up his original file again. K9ZEPHR handler. Classified. Mission count. 19. Final deployment. Helmand Province. Status. Injured. Disposition. Deceased medical euthanasia performed at Fort Damara. Except Fort Damara's animal unit had no record of euthanizing him. No cremation, no transfer, just a checkbox marked complete. Nora stood. I want to see the sanctuary, she said. James blinked. It's gone. Then I want to see what's left of it. Later that night, they drove 3 hours north to where the coordinates once pointed. The land was fenced off now. Overgrown weeds, a few derelict sheds, and a water trough rusted with time. But the bones of something lingered. Zephyr stepped out of the car first, nose to the wind. His tail went stiff. He didn't bark. He just walked toward a specific corner of the fence, Saturday down, then pawed once at the dirt. Nora followed and found a pile of buried collars. Some torn, some intact. All marked with numbers, not names. She picked one up. It still had a tag. K9RS14. Status: retired. Do not reassign. The last word had been crossed out. Underneath, scratched crudely with something sharp. Delivered, James muttered. This wasn't a sanctuary. It was a sorting hub. Dogs go in, Nora murmured, but only ghosts come out. She looked back at Zephyr. He stood now, silent as always, but his eyes shimmered with something old. Not just pain, not even just loyalty, recognition, as if this was where his memory began to fracture, and where someone else's plan had started. Nora turned to James. Pull every veterinary licensing file connected to Nova, and any black market animal control tags. I want to know where every dog marked retired from 2018 to now ended up. James didn't argue. He saw what she saw. This wasn't about Zephyr. It was about hundreds, maybe more. As they drove away, Zephyr sat up in the back seat, ears alert again. Behind them, the wind rattled the broken sign that once read, Welcome to Nova Haven. The last word dangled by a single nail flapping uselessly. Sanctuary, it claimed. But Zephyr knew better. He had lived the truth. Nora sat alone in the evidence room, the glow from her laptop casting sharp shadows across her face. The hum of the HVAC was the only sound, a steady reminder of the quiet urgency that had settled over the bureau. On her screen were pages of documents, transfer logs, veterinary reports, and psychological assessments files that should never have existed. She scrolled through them carefully, eyes narrowing as she absorbed the story they told. The papers showed Zephyr's transfer path after his military retirement rerouted through 3 separate private clinics. Each clinic was barely more than a front. Anonymous addresses, inconsistent licensing, and personnel who seemed to appear and vanish like ghosts. The first clinic was in rural Wyoming, ostensibly a rehab center for retired canine second. The second was a veterinary facility in Nevada with suspiciously low patient loads and erratic inspection reports. The third was a private animal behavior research lab in New Mexico, which had been shut down following multiple complaints and a hushed federal inquiry. Zephyr had been shuffled through all 3 in less than 8 weeks. What caught Nora's attention wasn't just the timeline, but the psychological evaluation reports appended to the files. The assessments were clinical and cold, but revealed a struggle beneath the surface. Subject exhibits resistance to new command protocols, increased latency in obedience responses, signs of cognitive dissonance when following directives that conflict with prior training, heightened stress behaviors when handled by unfamiliar personnel. Asterisk, asterisk. Nora's fingers paused over the keyboard. She read the words aloud, as if testing their meaning. Resistance to new commands. A dog trained to obey, now choosing when and whom to obey. Her thoughts drifted back to Arya's trembling whisper. He wouldn't help them. The line echoed in her mind like a prayer, a plea, a promise. Flipping through the files, Nora found a handwritten note attached to one report almost like a margin comment. Subject's refusal to cooperate appears tied to recognition of previous handlers. Loyalty to prior handler supersedes new commands. Behavioral conditioning conflicted by moral cognition. Moral cognition. The phrase struck a chord. Could a dog trained for war possess a sense of right and wrong that transcended orders? Nora thought of Zephyr's gaze so sharp, so knowing. She tapped the phone and called James. "Have you looked at the psych reports?" James's voice was dry on the line. "Yeah." It's like he was fighting himself. Exactly. They tried to break him, to reprogram him for their purposes. Nora exhaled. But the bond with Arya, it's like he found a way to protect her. Not because he was ordered, but because he chose to. The files contained video clips from behavioral sessions. They showed Zephyr tethered to handlers in sterile rooms, responding sluggishly to commands. But in one clip, something different happened. The handler raised a leash, attempting to redirect Zephyr toward an unresponsive command. Zephyr hesitated, head dipping, eyes flicking to a corner of the room. Then, instead of compliance, he lunged toward the corner and began quietly growling. The handler struck the floor with a metal rod, but Zephyr did not relent. Nora felt the weight of the dog's defiance. It was no longer mere obedience or disobedience. It was a rebellion. She remembered Arya's voice again. He wouldn't help them. The dog had been forced to serve a cruel purpose, to be used as a silent transporter, a living vehicle in the trafficking network. But Zephyr's loyalty, deeply ingrained in his soul, had overridden every imposed command. He had chosen to protect rather than to obey. Nora closed the laptop and looked toward Zephyr, who lay peacefully in the adjoining room, his breathing even. She thought of how often loyalty had been weaponized, how often obedience had been twisted into cruelty. The phone rang, breaking the quiet. It was Corinne. "We found more," her voice urgent. "More what?" "Records, clinics, dogs, transfer logs matching Zephyr's pattern." Nora's heart sank. "They're not alone." The line went dead. Nora stared at the blank screen, mind racing. If Zephyr's story was one of defiance and loyalty, what of the others? How many more dogs had been ripped from service, manipulated, used? And how many children were still waiting to be saved by a dog brave enough to disobey? She looked at the door to Arya's room and whispered, "We'll find them." The pediatric recovery room was dim, except for a single lamp glowing near Arya's pillow. She sat upright, small shoulders wrapped in a bureau-issue fleece blanket, stuffed rabbit pressed tight to her chest. Zephyr lay on the floor facing the door, but his eyes kept drifting back to her, tracking every tremor in her breath. Nora pulled the chair closer, sliding a photo array onto the rolling table. "Sweetheart, I'm going to show you some faces. You can nod or shake your head, no need to speak if it's hard, okay?" Arya's fingers twitched on the rabbit's ear. She nodded. Nora flipped the first sheet. 8 photos, all middle-aged men in medical coats. Arya scanned them, eyes flat, then shook her head. Second sheet. Third. Nothing. On the fourth sheet, her gaze stopped. The smallest flicker-like wind-brushing candle flame. She lifted her hand and pointed. Row 2, column 3. A gaunt man, late 40s, hair receding. But it wasn't the face that anchored her, it was the white puckered scar bisecting the skin between thumb and forefinger on his right hand. "That's him," she whispered, barely sound. "The doctor with the scar." Nora leaned forward, heartbeat quickening. "You're certain?" Arya's voice gained a thread of steel. "He argued with a man named Vince. Said the merchandise had to move tonight or it would spoil. Vince told him to shut up and finish the prep. They fought about numbers 287B and C. Nora felt a chill. Those were the numbers scrawled above the beds of the rescued children. She pressed the intercom. "James, bring up image 4, 2, 3, full resolution." Moments later, James entered with a tablet displaying the same face, now tagged with a bold red banner. "Fugitive, Dr. Adrian Halloran. Charges: illegal organ procurement, human trafficking conspiracy. Last seen Bangkok clinic raid, 2021. He'd vanished before extradition." Nora swallowed. "So Halloran didn't disappear. He set up infrastructure here." James tapped the screen. "We cross-checked highway cams near the meat facility. 2 nights ago, a dark van parked behind the building. Driver wore gloves. Passenger matched Halloran's height. They loaded chilled containers." Nora turned back to Arya. "Did you hear where they planned to take you?" Arya's brows nodded. "The scar doctor kept saying, Phase 2 at the airstrip. Vince said they couldn't risk the field again." She hugged the rabbit tighter. He touched the scar when he was mad. Like it itched. Zephyr rose, muscles rippling under his coat, and approached Arya's bedside. He rested his head on the mattress, eyes fixed on Nora as if urging her on. "A knock at the doorway, Dr. Corinne. Arya's vitals are stable, but fatigue's setting in. We should wrap soon." Nora nodded, then faced Arya gently. "One more question. Did you see any symbols, logos on the vans, the equipment, anything?" Arya closed her eyes, searching the dark. There was a blue circle with 3 white lines, like waves. "On the freezer boxes." James's eyes widened. "Mariner Biologics, offshore shell front. They were on Interpol's shortlist last quarter." The puzzle pieces slammed together. Dogs rerouted through fake sanctuaries. Children cataloged like parts. A fugitive surgeon and a logistics man named Vince coordinating export. Everything masked beneath charities and marine shipping covers. Nora rose, adrenaline sharpening her focus. Get facial rec across regional airports. Halloran's not flying commercial. He'll use private cargo. Flag every Mariner crate. James hesitated, then looked at Zephyr. "And the dog?" Zephyr responded before Nora could stepping back. He barked once, short and decisive. Arya managed a tired smile. "He says hurry." Nora placed a hand on Zephyr's harness. "Copy that, soldier." To James. "Prep tactical and med evac. We move now before 6 hours becomes 1. As she left, Arya's whisper followed her soft, but carrying the weight of a verdict. "He wouldn't help them, but he'll help you." Nora glanced back. Zephyr had resumed his post by the bed, tail thumping once as their eyes met an oath exchanged in silence. Outside, in the corridor humming with sudden purpose, Nora felt the storm shift. The scarred doctor had resurfaced. The trail was hot, and the dog who refused immoral orders was about to lead them again, this time toward the men who traded children like cargo. And this time, they would not get away. The pediatric wing of St. Vincent's slept under dim halos of light. Machines hummed lullabies for children who no longer trusted them. In room 1, 2, 8-year-old Micah Reyes sat cross-legged on his bed, eyes hollow, lungs breathing like it hurt to move air. He hadn't spoken in 2 years, not since disappearing from a playground in Albuquerque. Dr. Corinne stood quietly at his bedside. "Micah," she whispered, "would it be okay if a visitor came in? He's very gentle." No reply, but a flicker of his eyes toward the door was all she needed. Nora entered with Zephyr beside her. No harness, no commands, just presence. Zephyr padded in, stopped halfway, and lay down, gaze locked on the boy. Minutes passed. Then, a whisper barely breath. "He came back." Corinne's eyes welled. Micah reached toward Zephyr, touched fur. "I saw him," the boy whispered. "When the lights went off, he stayed." Zephyr stepped forward, laid his paw on the mattress. Micah leaned forward until their foreheads met release, washing through his shoulders. Later, he looked at Nora. "He saved the girl. I thought he left me." "No," she said. "He brought help, and now he's back for you. Can he stay?" "As long as you need," Corinne promised. Micah fell asleep, hand buried in fur. The silence, broken. The mission, still ongoing. In room 1-4, the girl in yellow drew in silence. Sophia Marin, age 6, was found beside Micah alive, barely. Unlike him, she spoke only in murmurs, her voice rarely reaching people. But she drew constantly, each picture a coded scream, red bars, bone saws, crates with strange logos. Zephyr lay beside her bed, eyes on every crayon stroke. She held up one, drawing thick red bars with black arcs. "Red room," she said softly. "Lights hot." Another drawing showed a vent, gloved hands, then a blob with 4 legs and amber eyes. "That's him," Sophia said, tapping the shape. "Hero." She whispered more about Vince, a man who laughed about selling Zephyr too, about boxes with wavy blue lines, about a ship. "Make the ship," she whispered. "They said the boxes had to make the ship." Each picture was visual intel locations, people, smells. Nora snapped phone shots and sent them to James. "Cross-check truck routes, Blue Wave logo." Then a final drawing, 3 circles like portholes, and scrawled backward letters. ECIPS. "Ship?" Sophia confirmed. She cried, finally. Zephyr didn't move, only nudged her elbow. She buried her face in his neck, one hand still gripping the yellow crayon. Nora gathered the drawings into a folder labeled Evidence Child Statements. That night, upstairs, a makeshift studio had been set. Aria Harper, rescued weeks before, sat beneath soft lights, sunflower blanket hiding rib bandages. A mic blinked red. Nora crouched beside her. "This isn't for court," she reminded. "It's for kids still waiting. Talk to them like you wish someone had talked to you." Aria's eyes flicked to the door where Zephyr waited just outside. Each glance he returned with a slow blink. "Steady. With you." "Rolling in 5, the text said. Aria inhaled. "My name is Aria," she began. "I know how you feel." Then she described cold lights, lies, being told she'd wake up better. Her fingers twisted in her blanket. "But it wasn't my fault. It's not yours either." She smiled faintly. "There was a dog. A hero dog. He waited. And when the time was right, he carried me away. His name is Zephyr." Zephyr's tail thumped once. "To the people still there, hold on. Leave something small. A sock. A drawing. Hero can smell where you are. He'll come." She paused, eyes narrowing. "And to the ones who hurt us? Zephyr doesn't choose you." Silence followed. Then she smiled. "I'll be waiting with crayons and cookies." And Hero. Cut. Nora wrapped her in a hug. Zephyr was finally allowed in. He laid his head on her lap. Aria whispered something to him that no one else heard. The film would go to every safe house, every checkpoint, an encrypted invitation to courage. In the nest room, a girl listed only as Jane Doe 312 cried without sound. Zephyr lay beside her, breathing in rhythm until she matched him. When she gripped his fur, it was as if her world stopped spinning long enough to rest, Dr. Corinne observed. "Every child stabilizes faster with him," Nora replied softly. "Because he believes them first, so they believe themselves." At the memory wall, drawings bloomed. Sunflower gowns, paw prints, crayon dogs with badges. Under it hung Aria's first rescue note, "Help us." Beside it now, A Polaroid Zephyr curled beside Jane Doe, her fingers barely touching his coat. Below it, Nora wrote, "Jane does no more." The man nodded, eyes glistening. Arya's whisper rose again, not for the mic, but for Zephyr alone. "You'll find them, won't you?" Zephyr's tail swept the floor. Yes. Always yes. And in that tiny room, saturated with the smell of antiseptic and camera cables, Hope found a voice thin, quivering, unstoppable. Outside, wind battered the hospital windows. But inside, a girl's message had taken flight, carried on the silent paws of the dog who never failed her. Tomorrow, somewhere in a gray hallway behind a locked door, a frightened child might hear it, might believe it, and might hold on. Because Hero was coming. The command floor at the Denver field office had traded its usual hum for controlled chaos. Maps sprawled across digital walls, lines of red and blue veining out like hurried arteries. Phone lines buzzed with interagency chatter. Homeland Security in D.C., state troopers from Nebraska, a lone Interpol liaison patching in from Lyon at 3 a.m. his time. The air smelled of stale coffee and the metallic bite of urgency. At the center stood Nora Vance, hair pulled into a no-nonsense knot, flak jacket half-zipped. Her voice cut through the din. "Eyes here, we have 4 confirmed targets derived from yesterday's raid and child art intel." Behind her, the screens flicked to 4 warehouse photos, each stamped with a countdown clock set at 72 hours 00 minutes. "Site Alpha," she pointed. Aurora Docks seafood distribution hub leasing trucks with the Mariner Wave logo. Halloran's cargo moved through here last week. "Site Bravo," another tap. Abandoned airstrip outside Cheyenne private hangars registered to shell company Peregrine Risk Solutions. "Site Charlie Rural Veterinary Rehab Ranch in Kansas. Same veterinarian license flagged in Zephyr's forged death certificate." And Site Delta, the final image. Cold storage facility near Omaha rail lines. Utility draw spiked 2 nights ago, then power kill similar to the meat plant. James Moreno zoomed each map quadrant. If those kids are still alive, they'll be processed and shipped within the next 3 days. After that ocean freight, untraceable. He clicked a folder. Photos of organ preservation containers, chilling units, paperwork stamped MBX, cargo. A hush rippled. Everyone understood. Failure meant children carved up and sold, body by body, to buyers who never asked names. Nora straightened. "We run simultaneous strikes. No leaks, no delays. This isn't a local bust. It's an eradication." She turned to the seated task force leads. "Captain Reyes, DHS cover Alpha with your maritime team. Lieutenant Chen, Air Wing Bravo is yours. FBI TAC 3 goes after Charlie. I'll head Delta with K9 Unit 1. A murmur. Delta lay deepest inside farm country, hardest to reinforce. But no one questioned her choice. They'd seen how Zephyr moved through darkness. The shepherd sat beside Nora's boots. Harness newly fitted with dual camera rig and Kevlar mesh. His eyes, ever alert, scanned faces like reading intent. Karen had cleared him only an hour earlier. Vitals solid, limp, minimal, psyche, laser, focused. Zephyr was ready. "Why Delta?" James asked quietly when the circle broke for logistics. Nora lifted a case file. Inside, Sophia's drawing of 3 portholes and Micah's sketch of a freezer vent. "Look at the cargo ramps on their satellite images. They match the vent grid pattern the kids drew. And Delta shares rail access straight to the Missouri River ports. It's the final funnel." She lowered her voice. "Halloran will want the easiest exit after his last hub blew." James exhaled, nodding. 72 hours. Amen. 70 now, she corrected, glancing at the countdown. Within 30 minutes, the operations floor transformed into deployment staging. Rows of body armor clattered onto tables. Crates of night vision goggles snapped open. Satellite feeds refreshed every minute, each blip a possible heartbeat in cold storage. Nora knelt to Zephyr, clipping an extra transmitter to his collar. "We go dark out there, no lights, no chatter unless we have them." Zephyr's ears tilted, understanding in the silent space between them. She rubbed the scar behind his left ear, Kandahar's mark, and whispered, "Find them, bring them home." Zephyr puffed a low breath, tail sweeping once like a sword drawn. Convoy engines rumbled to life, black SUVs for DHS, helicopters spinning on rooftop pads, One cargo plane revved at Centennial Airport, ready to drop tack, 3 near the Kansas ranch. Nora's team loaded into a matte gray armored van. James climbed into the passenger seat, laptop open to shared satellite feeds. A young analyst sprinted up, handing Nora an encrypted phone. "Ma'am," Interpol forwarded a tip. Halloran's alias, Dr. Hobbs, manifested on a medical charter flight plan leaving Omaha in 71 hours. Destination: Belize City. Nora slid the phone into her vest. Then Deltazar window. She thumbed the van intercom. "Team 1, status." Voices answered. "Ready. Ready." Zephyr barked once. "Ready." The armored doors slammed. The convoy rolled out, lights off. Sirens, silent phantoms, headed east beneath a bruised purple dawn. Interagency channel crackled. DHS boat team staging near Aurora docks. Drone footage showed 2 refrigerated trucks idling at Site Alpha Wave logo visible. Captain Reyes's voice filtered through static. "Thermal shows 4 warm bodies inside warehouse. Possible miners. Awaiting green." Nora answered. "Hold. All sites breach together at H 2 o'clock. We scare one nest, the others scatter. H 58 to 40. Kansas ranch drone panned over kennels empty, but heat signatures inside the main barn. TAC 3 reported nylon harness racks, canine-sized. Reprogramming station. Zephyr whined at the feed as if smelling a memory. "Easy, partner," Nora murmured, though her knuckles blanched against the armrest. The van fueled in central Nebraska while intel updated. Halloran's lieutenant, Vince Calder, pinged on toll cameras entering Iowa in a blue panel van. Direction Omaha. Nora traced the route on the map overlay. He'll arrive Delta by nightfall. James typed rapid queries. Cross-checking shipping orders. Delta scheduled rail pickup tonight, 2,300 hours. Destination: St. Louis Port, flagged as frozen seafood. Nora's pulse hammered. "They're moving earlier. Adjust breach to H 4 o'clock. Relay all units. Delta perimeter. Barren silos. Windmill skeletons. A hulking concrete block branded Coldstream Logistics." The air smelled of fertilizer and iron. Snow began to spit from a gunmetal sky. TAC 1 fanned across fields, cutting power lines with silent charges. Snipers took roost on grain towers. Nora crouched beside Zephyr behind a tractor husk, radio whispering final checks. Inside the Kevlar casing, Zephyr's heartbeat transmitted steady her metronome. She met his gaze. No more cages. His tail thumped. Agreement sealed. Simultaneous green lights flashed on comms. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie positions ready. Nora inhaled, the frigid air stabbing her lungs. "On my mark. 3, 2, breach," explosives whispered. Doors buckled, darkness swallowed by tactical beams. Nora and Zephyr slipped through a side personnel hatch as alarms died, mid-chirp power already severed. Inside, the cold punched harder than outside a man-made winter. Crates lined steel corridors, each stamped with the Wave logo. From beyond a double door came the hiss of respirators. Zephyr lunged forward, nose to concrete, then whipped left, barking once urgent, certain. Nora followed. 72 hours had shrunk to 4 minutes, and every second now measured a life. Snow dusted the corrugated roof of Coldstream Logistics as Nora's entry team advanced through the maze-cold hallways. Their breath plumed in ghostly ribbons. Bootsteps thudded dully on concrete. Zephyr trotted point, nose skimming, skids and crates, tail stiff, every muscle tuned to invisible frequencies. "Radiological wands clean," whispered Agent Malik, sweeping another crate. "Just refrigeration coils humming." Nora's gut said otherwise. She'd learned to trust that gut, but Zephyr's body language mattered more. His ears flicked left, right, then flattened. A low rumble vibrated up his chest. Something was wrong. They reached an intersecting corridor, where pallets blocked a rolling door. Past them, a service bay yawning open to dark. Malik's flashlight arced over stacked boxes labeled "Perishable, Atlantic Cod." He stepped forward. Zephyr barked sharp, "Explosive." "Hold," Nora snapped. Malik froze mid-stride. Zephyr backed away, hackles spiking, gaze fixed on a seam where 2 crates touched the wall. Nora knelt, squinting. Thin copper wire glinted beneath the pallet plastic. Tripwire. Disarm? Malik mouthed. No time. Nora tapped her mic. Delta teams. Explosive rig at Service Corridor Bravo 7. Possible secondary back off 10 meters. Agents eased away, hearts thundering louder than their suppressed radios. Zephyr retreated too, but not far, his stare locked on the wire, as if willing it to confess more secrets. Nora swept a thermal wand. Behind the crates, a heat bloom registered small, human-shaped, barely above hypothermic. Kid, she breathed. They booby-trapped the exit. Malik's eyes widened. They knew we'd breach where they hid the children. Nora cursed under her breath. They're using them as shields. She clicked channel 2. James, confirm vantage? See anything on west exterior? Static, then James. Negative. Bay door welded. No movement topside. You've got 8 minutes before DHS sweeps Alpha need to sync timeline. Copy, Nora answered, then looked at Zephyr. Find another path. Ugh. He spun, sniffing air currents, then loped toward a side alcove cluttered with forklift batteries. He pawed at sheet metal paneling. Nora's beam found a dent. Someone had kicked this loose recently. Malik, pry it. A crowbar groaned. The panel popped free, revealing a narrow maintenance shaft. Cold vapor spilled from below. Zephyr slipped in without hesitation. Nora followed, crouched, pulse hammering. The shaft funneled them beneath the booby-trapped corridor. Pipes dripped condensation. Cables snaked like dormant vipers. 20 meters in, Zephyr stopped, nose to ceiling grate. Through slits, Nora glimpsed the crate stack and, beyond, a child curled on the floor, wrists taped, an oxygen mask askew. Heart rate monitor beside him blinked red. Dead. Cords wired to crate movement, Malik whispered, eye on the device clamped to his wrist. If the pallet slides or sensor trips, boom. Nora's mind raced. They had a safe vector under instead of through. Cut through floor panel, she ordered. Malik used a silent diamond saw. Sparks kissed his gloves but died instantly in the cold. Above, the child stirred. Zephyr whined softly, head tilting. Panel free, Nora eased up through the grate. Her body emerged behind the crate's shadow, out of line with the wire. She crawled to the boy, 6, 7, skin bluish, IV taped to a bruised forearm. She placed gloved fingers on his neck, pulse thin but present. Zephyr's head rose through the grate, amber eyes urging haste. Nora severed the IV tube, cradled the boy, and slid him down to Malik waiting below. The moment his weight left her arms, a metal clank echoed pallet settling. The wire twanged. Out! Nora hissed. Zephyr dropped first. Malik grabbed Nora's vest, yanking her into the shaft as the world above erupted shockwave, splintered crates, cold fish guts, snowing fireless sparks. The blast roared down the tunnel like a monster's breath, but shielded by pipes and turns, it spent itself before reaching them. Silence crashed in after the boom, louder than the explosion. Nora's ears rang. She felt for Zephyr, found fur, felt his chest rise. Malik coughed. The boy whimpered. They crawled back toward the entry grate. Above, debris smoldered. Sprinklers hissed, steam fogging the ruin. The trip wire had obliterated evidence, but not life. Nora radioed. Delta contact trap detonated. Child recovered, stable, proceeding to extraction. Advise perimeter. Perpetrators rigged failsafes. Expect same at all sites. James's reply was tight with relief. Copy. Alpha clear. 3 kids alive. Bravo reports 2 rescues. No hostiles captured. Charlie found empty cages. Nora hoisted the boy, handing him to EMS, waiting at the secondary door, now breached by backup teams. He clutched her sleeve weakly. Zephyr nudged the boy's dangling hand before medics whisked him away. The child's lips moved, voice a rasp. Nora barely caught. Dog. Found me. Nora met Zephyr's gaze. Yeah, kid. He finds everyone they try to lose. Sirens wailed outside as agents fanned deeper into the warehouse, eyes sharp for more wires. Nora rested a hand on Zephyr's neck, feeling the steady drum of his heart. 1 trap down, she murmured. 2 targets left tonight. Zephyr's tail flicked ready. Frost-laden air swirled through the broken wall, carrying dawn's first hint of rose. It mixed with smoke and the salty tang of shattered crates. But under it all, Nora sensed a cleaner note. The scent of hope, thin yet unburned. They stepped into it together, soldier and dog, knowing the next doorway could sing with death, but also that another heartbeat was waiting on the other side, praying for paw steps in the dark. The runway lights of Prairie Valley Air Park cut faint amber dashes through the pre-dawn mist. Once a crop duster strip, it had been leased under an LLC 2 months earlier, the same LLC that funneled money into Nova Canine Trust. At 4:37, the tower log showed an unscheduled Hawker 800 touching down, engines hot, transponder squawking, a bogus medical evac code. Nora's Suburban fishtailed to a stop behind a vacant hangar, headlamps killed. She and her 6-person detail poured out, boots crunching frozen gravel. Zephyr leapt down last, nose lifting to the wind. Jet fuel, adrenaline, and something metallic fear. James's whisper crackled over comms. Thermal shows 5 bodies on the tarmac. One matches Halloran's gait favoring left leg. Cargo is loading from a refrigerated van. Nora signaled, split and box. Agents fanned wide, rifles suppressed. Zephyr stayed at her heel, muscles coiled. Ahead, floodlights revealed the fugitive surgeon Dr. Adrian Halloran white coat flapping over a leather flight jacket, scar gleaming between thumb and forefinger as he signed a manifest on a clipboard. Beside him, Vince Calder, tattoos snaking under a parka sleeve, shoved a steel crate up the loading ramp. 2 hired guns watched nervy fingers on SMGs. Halloran barked, "Move it! Wheels up in 5. Nora's team advanced behind stacked fuel drums. 30 meters. 20. A gust ripped over the plane, rattling hangar tin concealing their final footfalls. "Federal agents," Nora's voice sliced the chill. "Drop your weapons." Chaos ignited. Vince swung his SMG toward the voice. Muzzle flash stuttered. Zephyr launched silent comets slamming Vince's gun arm. Round sprayed sky. Agents closed. Lights strobed. Shouts overlapped. Halloran bolted for the air stair. Nora sprinted, breath frosting, boots pounding aluminum steps before he could seal the hatch. Inside the cabin, chilled crates lined the aisle. A chemical cold bit her cheeks. Halloran spun, brandishing a compact pistol. "Back, Agent! 1 round in these boxes, and you're bathing in antifreeze blood." Nora leveled her Glock. "Drop it, Doctor. Show me your hands." He laughed, thin, ragged. "You think you've won? This is 1 branch. Cut it. 2 more sprout." He thumbed the safety off. Below, Zephyr's growl rolled up the stairs low, seismic. Halloran's eyes flicked down. Zephyr stood on the tarmac, front paws on the lowest step. Teeth bared but controlled an executioner waiting permission. Halloran's confidence faltered. He glanced past Nora toward the cockpit. No pilot. Entry team had already secured him, out of miracles. "Hands," Nora repeated. Halloran's shoulders sagged, but spite still flashed. "You're saving scraps. Organs will always fetch a price higher than your conscience." Nora stepped closer, voice like stone. "Tell that to the kids who'll breathe because you didn't leave this runway." Halloran's smirk cracked. He opened his mouth, whether for negotiation or curse, Nora never knew. Zephyr barked once, thunder in a steel tube. The pistol clanged to the floor. Agents swarmed, cuffing the surgeon against the galley. As zip ties bit his wrists, Halloran twisted to spit over his shoulder. "You'll never shut it down," Nora answered by reading him his rights. Outside, Vince lay prone, arms secured, muttering curses as medics cleaned a bite through his jacket. He glared at Zephyr. "Freak dog!" Zephyr responded with another guttural growl, deeper, promising. Nora descended the stairs, adrenaline washing to cold clarity. Snowflakes whirled under floodlights, clinging to Zephyr's muzzle. She knelt, scratching the fur along his jaw. "Good boy." 1 branch down. Zephyr's tail swept once, then stilled eyes scanning horizon, ever vigilant. James jogged over, face etched with exhausted relief. "Cargo's clean, 2 pediatric patients on ice, still viable for transplant. They'll make it." "Because Halloran didn't," Nora replied. She looked past the runway toward the gray blush of dawn breaking over endless fields. "Still think it's just 1 branch?" James asked. Nora straightened, tightening her vest. "Number? But the tree just lost its heartwood." She turned to Zephyr. "And our lumberjack's ready for the next swing." "M." The shepherd sat, snow melting on his back, gaze fixed on the horizon where darkness receded. Somewhere out there, other labs waited. Other children waited. His growl faded into a steady breath-iron resolve in winter air. 2 weeks after the airstrip arrest, sunlight bathed Quantico's K-9 field. No banners, no brass, just a quiet half-circle of agents, therapists, and children. Zephyr trotted beside Nora, no longer in his military vest, but in a new harness stitched. FBI CR201, Child Rescue and Trauma Unit. Micah clutched Zephyr's retired unit patch. Sophia wore her sunflower dress, holding a crayon box. Both had insisted on attending. Assistant Director Caldwell stepped to the mic. Zephyr's instincts saved 9 children and reminded us that training is not always enough. Sometimes we need conscience. He paused. Effective immediately. Zephyr is no longer evidence. He's active duty partner, not property. Applause rose soft, reverent. Zephyr's eyes stayed on the kids. Nora knelt to clip a paw print badge onto his harness. Wear it proud, soldier, she whispered. Zephyr leaned his forehead into hers. A battlefield gesture. The field fell silent. Inside CRTU's pastel wing, children's drawings lined the halls. Plush animals waited on therapy chairs. But all eyes were drawn to a new space, Zephyr's den. Soft blankets and magnetic letters, spelling welcome. In an observation room, Ava Lewis, age 9, sat silent. Mutism onset. Nora unclipped Zephyr's lead. All yours, partner. He padded in, lay 2 meters away, chin on paws, angled sideways, non-threatening. Minutes passed. Ava peeked. Zephyr rolled partly to his side, revealing a faint scar. A whisper broke the silence. Does it hurt? Nora's breath caught. First words. Ava slid down, reaching a trembling hand to trace the scar. Mine's here, she said, lifting her gown, showing her own. Scar to scar, hurt to hurt. Thank you for coming back, she whispered into his fur. Later, at a SWAT test site, Zephyr ignored planted adult scents, stopped outside room 3. Inside, a volunteer sobbed. He entered, lay down 1 foot away. No wagging, no licking, just calm presence. The child reached out. Zephyr moved closer only when invited, head resting gently in her lap. A psychologist observed. Heart rate dropped 24 BPM in 40 seconds. Outside, the hardened SWAT chief muttered, "We need 3 more like him." You don't deserve the one you've got, Nora smiled. Every 4th Saturday, a black SUV returned. Aria Harper, once a rescued girl, now wore overalls and high tops. A faint scar crossed her temple, but her smile was sunlight. She stepped out. Missed you, hero. Zephyr bounded to meet her joy without chaos. Nora watched their reunion. The living proof trauma didn't always win. Inside CRTU's library, Aria read The Bravest Dog in the World aloud. When she stumbled over treacherous, Zephyr nudged her hand. She giggled, tried again. We own those words, she whispered into his ear after finishing. Agility games followed low hurdles, wobble boards. Aria sprinted beside Zephyr, squealing with each success. She's gained 3 pounds, Dr. Corinne said. Reading fluency up 2 grades. Nightmares once a week now. She rehearses safety here, Nora said, watching Zephyr accept a treat shaped like a star. And he never forgets her wins. Afternoons ended in the quiet room. Aria lay beside Zephyr on soft mats. Tell me a strong moment, Nora invited. Aria smiled. I answered out loud in science class. That's huge. How did it feel? Like my voice belonged to me again. She scratched Zephyr's ear. He told me to use it. Nora blinked fast. He's good at that. When I grow up, can I work here? Help kids like me? You already do. But yes, you'll have any badge you want. Deal. As Aria left, she pressed her hand to the SUV window. Zephyr raised a paw. Silent promise. Corinne joined Nora on the steps. She sheds fear every trip. Nora nodded. And every laugh she gains is one less nightmare he carries. In room 6, the nest Zephyr lay beside a new child. Jane Doe, 312. Recently rescued. No name, no relatives yet. Only a number on her gown. She sobbed silently into Zephyr's fur, fists clutching as if life depended on it. Nora entered quietly. No words. Zephyr's breath rose and fell slow, tidal. Eventually the child's matched his. Minutes passed. Her fingers loosened. She lifted her head slightly. Snot coated his coat. He didn't move. "You're safe," Nora whispered. "He knows how to keep secrets." The girl laid her head back down lighter this time. Nora watched bruises fade to trust. She whispered to Zephyr, "Another soul you found." He blinked slowly. Mission understood. 7 minutes. That's all it took. Better than meds. Gentler than lullabies. Later, Nora pinned a new Polaroid to the memory wall Zephyr beside the sleeping girl. Caption: Jane does no more. In the courtyard, Zephyr sipped water. Nora knelt beside him. "How do you keep giving?" He bumped her shoulder gently, then stared at the blank frame on the wall, waiting to be filled. Nora stood. Right. One more saved. A breeze stirred, carrying cherry blossoms. Zephyr padded toward the entrance. Another child was waiting. The envelope was small. No postmark, no agency seal, just Nora Vance's name written in uneven blue ink, the letters slightly wobbly but unmistakably intentional. It had been slipped beneath her door during the early hours of the morning, tucked into the seam like something sacred. She found it after her third cup of coffee. When the silence of the office finally allowed her eyes to drift toward the threshold, she bent, picked it up gently, like you would lift a note left by a child afraid their voice might break in open air. And maybe that's exactly what it was. There was no return address, but she knew. Back at her desk, she opened the envelope slowly, careful not to tear the paper. A single folded page slid out. It wasn't a letter in the traditional sense. Not words first. It was a picture, drawn in crayon, 8 colors, maybe 9. Layered in careful strokes, the scene was familiar and yet entirely new. Zephyr stood tall in front of the stone steps of the FBI's Denver field office, his black and tan coat rendered in warm swirls of gold and ash. Beside him, a girl held his leash, not gripping, but resting her hand loosely over the handle, like trust embodied. The girl wore a yellow dress, and just above their heads, where the sun should have been, Arya had written in block letters that leaned gently to the right, "Thank you for believing us." Nora didn't realize she had stopped breathing until the warmth of tears blurred the page. She blinked them away, one by one, letting the weight of the drawing sink into her chest. Not me, she thought. We. Zephyr stirred from where he lay beneath her desk, ears twitching. He stood and patted over, pressing his nose softly to her thigh. "You knew, didn't you?" Nora murmured, stroking behind his ear. "From the moment she touched your muzzle, you knew she'd find her way back." Zephyr didn't move, didn't wag. He simply stayed. The kind of staying that had held so many kids together. The wall behind her desk bore little in the way of official decor. Her FBI certificate, yellowing slightly at the corners. A shelf of casebooks. But next to all that, near the light switch where her eyes often lingered between meetings, hung the photo wall. Candid moments rescued children with Zephyr. Doctors mid-smile. Corinne laughing so hard her eyes closed. Even James, once, holding a kitten one of the kids had insisted he adopt. Nora pulled a clean black frame from the drawer, a spare she'd been saving for something that mattered. She slid the drawing inside with careful fingers, aligning the edges so the words stood just level with the frame's lip. No trimming, no editing. She mounted it dead center, slightly above eye level, then stepped back. It was imperfect. The lines in Zephyr's tail didn't match. The girl's feet didn't quite meet the ground. But none of that mattered. It was memory. A testimony that belief didn't require proof, only presence. Later that afternoon, Nora passed the new intake wing where fresh arrivals were being evaluated. Zephyr had gone ahead, his gait calm, nose slightly lowered, already reading the air for pain invisible to adult eyes. She paused at the hallway corner and glanced through the half-open therapy room door. Inside, 2 children sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes wide. Between them lay a sketchbook, and on the page a new drawing in progress. A dog with a badge on his harness. Beside him, children held signs. One read, "We're safe now." Another, "He listens." Nora felt her chest expand, not with pride, but with something deeper, like witness, like humility in the face of something wordless but good. A therapist approached, whispering, "They started drawing as soon as Zephyr walked in. They haven't spoken yet, but they're communicating." Nora nodded. Sometimes drawing is their first language back. That evening, She returned to her office and sat beneath the framed picture. Outside, dusk bled slowly through the window, laying long shadows over her desk. She turned the desk lamp on low, bathing the picture in gold. Then, from the hallway, a child's voice. Light, laughing. Aria. She was here for her monthly visit. Reading had been going well. Zephyr always waited by the doors when she arrived, and she never walked in without hugging his neck first. Nora didn't get up. She just listened. To the giggle, to the sound of hope reshaping a girl's lungs. Then Zephyr appeared again. Nose first, tail curved in greeting. Aria peeked in. "Hi," she said shyly. "Hi," Nora smiled. The girl's eyes darted to the framed drawing. "You kept it." "Of course I did," Nora said. "It's perfect." Aria looked down, then back up. "I wanted you to remember. I won't forget," Nora said. "Not ever." "Oh." Later, when the building hushed again and the halls returned to stillness, Nora lingered alone in her office. The only light came from the lamp and the soft breathing of Zephyr curled near the filing cabinet. She gazed at the picture one more time. A girl in yellow, a dog that never left, a caption that was more than thanks, it was testament. "Thank you for believing us." And she whispered into the quiet. "You saved us too, Aria." There were no calls that afternoon. No knock at the door, no briefings waiting on the desk, just the hush of late-day quiet and the hum of the ceiling fan. Nora sat alone in the glass-walled observation room overlooking the training field, a place where new canine recruits now paced, barked, and stumbled their way through the early chaos of trust building. She didn't look at them. Her eyes were on Zephyr, who lay on a patch of grass just off the track, head resting on his front paws, eyes closed. Not asleep, never fully, but still in that way only a dog who trusts his surroundings can be. The recording light blinked red on the camera in front of her. She reached up and clicked it on. The room was soundproof. The feed wouldn't go public. This wasn't for the world. It was for the archive, for memory, for the record that might one day matter. Nora folded her hands in her lap, then looked straight at the lens. "Most working dogs follow commands," she said softly. "They're trained to detect, to track, to act on orders with a precision we envy. Zephyr was trained like that too. His file says he was obedient, highly responsive, tactical." She paused, drawing in a breath. But none of that explains what happened in that alley behind the meat processing facility. Or why, when left without any handler's voice, he found a steel door none of us could see. It doesn't explain the child beneath the debris in the booby-trapped warehouse. Or how he ignored commands during his reconditioning phase, risking punishment just to sit beside a girl who wouldn't speak. Her voice thickened slightly. "But," she continued, "Zephyr followed commands."
But he didn't belong to them. Not really. He belonged to something deeper. He followed pain, fear.
The faintest tremor in a child's breath. He followed what was right. Outside the window, a breeze caught the grass. Zephyr lifted his head, just slightly, ears twitching. Nora smiled. "I've read all the psychological data," she said. "The documents said he resisted programming. They called it non-compliance. They tried to fix it, but maybe it wasn't a flaw in the training. Maybe it was something no one taught him." She looked down briefly, then back at the camera. Zephyr wasn't loyal to orders. He was loyal to the vulnerable. That's who he answered to. That's who he still answers to. M6. Later, she reviewed the body cam recordings again, segments archived for legal review, for training purposes, for internal reports. She watched the timestamp of the raid behind the deli. There was no command. No verbal cue, just the flash of Zephyr's shoulders tightening, his ears swiveling toward a faint sound beneath the clatter of distant trucks. He backed up, circled left, then darted behind the dumpster, pawing once, twice, then standing still as if to say, "Here, right here." It wasn't instinct. It wasn't smell alone. It was memory, pattern, a logic built not from obedience, but experience. In another clip, a 6-second loop of the warehouse trap. Zephyr stood in the threshold, then froze. No bark yet, just a shift in posture. Then, sharply, one bark, loud, urgent, then retreat, The others had been seconds from stepping on the trigger plate. "Good boy," James had muttered, barely audible. His voice cracked. Nora stood in the field at dusk. Zephyr approached slowly, his gait even. He sat beside her without prompting. "You broke the rules," she murmured. He tilted his head, not in confusion, but in calm reception, as if waiting for what she really meant. "I mean that in the best way," she added. "You didn't wait for permission. You didn't care who held the leash. You just knew." Her hand found the ruff of his neck. The scar there, a thin white line half lost beneath his fur, was still visible if you knew where to look. The price of defiance, perhaps. Or the mark of freedom. The next morning, she addressed a class of new handlers, green faces, nerves hidden behind confidence, folders full of protocol and procedure. On the projector behind her was a still photo. Zephyr lying next to the quiet boy in the hospital recovery room, the child's hand gripping his ear like a lifeline. "This," she said, pointing gently to the screen, "is not something we teach. You can't command this into being. What Zephyr does, what dogs like him do, it goes beyond the leash, beyond the title of K9. She turned to the room. They choose us. But more than that, they choose who needs them. In the last moments of her private archive video, Nora's voice softened again. She looked away from the camera, toward the space where Zephyr now lay outside the room's window. "Every handler wants to believe their dog listens to them," she said. "But if you're lucky, really lucky, your dog listens to something bigger. And then you have to do the hardest thing of all." She paused. "You have to trust him." A long silence followed. She didn't fill it. Then she reached forward and clicked off the recording. The red light dimmed. The screen went black. Outside, Zephyr was already on his feet, walking toward the children's wing. No command, no signal. Just knowing. The sky hadn't quite decided on light yet. It hovered in that in-between color lavender fading into ash, with the faintest brush of orange beginning to stretch across the eastern ridge of the tarmac. The blades of the chopper were still, but not for long. The low thrum of its idle hum carried across the cement like a breath waiting to be exhaled. Nora stood just outside the hangar, a thermos in her hand, steam curling from the lid like ghosts that didn't want to leave. She wasn't in uniform. Not really. A windbreaker over a t-shirt. Tactical pants. Sturdy boots. No badge on her chest. No rank. Just a worn patch sewn onto her shoulder. Child Recovery Division. And beneath it, a second newer one. The silhouette of a dog. Nose down. Ears back. Tail low. Focused. Moving forward. Zephyr sat beside her. His harness was already fastened, the chest strap snug against the thick fur of his frame. The small camera was clipped at the front, GPS beacon steady. She'd run the systems twice. Everything worked. But what mattered more than any of that was how still he sat. No leash, no voice command. He knew. She'd come to trust that knowing more than she trusted intel reports. They'd gotten the call just before 4 a.m. A boy, 7 years old, taken from a foster group transport on the outskirts of Spokane. There was no footage, just tire tracks, a single discarded sock with traces of midazolam, and the same insignia etched onto the inside heel of a child's shoe, a barely visible mark, like a manufacturer's scuff. But Nora recognized it. So did James. The doctor's words came back like rot in the air. "We're just one branch." And now, another route was showing. Zephyr stirred first, before the call, before the report was read aloud. He'd walked to the door of the handler's office and sat there, silent, watching, waiting. Nora met his gaze and nodded. That was all it took. Now, standing at the edge of the chopper ramp, she looked toward the eastern hills. Mist moved across the edge of the runway, like low-slung clouds, too tired to rise. The smell of jet fuel clung to the morning air. Somewhere behind them, the training center was waking up kids moving between therapy rooms, fresh muffins in the mess, the hum of cartoons and recovery. But this wasn't a morning of healing. This was a morning of pursuit. Nora stepped up onto the ramp. Zephyr followed. No hesitation, no glance for permission. Then halfway up, he did something she hadn't expected. He stopped, turned his head. Just for a second. He looked back toward the low building with the green-painted trim and the second-floor window with hand-painted stars stuck to the glass. Aria's room. She was probably still asleep, but he looked anyway. Then he looked forward again. His steps never faltered after that. Inside the chopper, the blades began their slow build to movement. The operator, a man with sun-creased skin and a silence Nora respected, handed her the headset. She put it on, voice low into the mic. "Pilot clear." The reply came back with a thumbs up. Zephyr settled at her feet, body low, eyes open. As the chopper lifted, she reached down, fingers curling into the fur just behind his shoulder where the scar had long since healed but never disappeared. "You don't have to do this forever," she whispered, barely audible over the whine of assent. Zephyr didn't blink, didn't move, didn't need to answer. He already had. The files on her lap were minimal, just a single folder, paper-clipped, marked Sparrow Echo. A code name hastily assigned, but enough to start with. One child, missing, and a question none of them could afford to ignore anymore. How many more? The light through the windows turned sharper as they gained altitude. Below, the world grew small streets, reduced to lines, buildings to blocks. But up here, inside the roar and the purpose and the quiet pact between Handler and K9, things didn't shrink. They sharpened. The world narrowed to a mission, a reason, and a vow: no more stolen breath, no more vanished voices, not on our watch. Nora glanced down at the patch on her sleeve. Her fingers brushed it once, then moved to the other Zephyr's silhouette. "He's not just tracking," she'd said once, weeks ago, in a congressional hearing no one had recorded. "He's remembering. He's choosing." Now, as the sun finally tipped over the horizon and poured golden light through the cockpit, she watched that dog at her feet lift his nose slightly, catching something on the air. Perhaps imagined, perhaps real. Then Zephyr stood, balanced as the chopper banked slightly, ears forward. She didn't say a word. She just nodded once, and together, they leaned into the wind. Some bonds don't need words. A loyal dog by your side, especially one like a German Shepherd, reminds us of the kind of love that's steady, selfless, and unwavering. Whether in moments of danger or quiet companionship, these animals give everything without expecting anything in return. And sometimes, that kind of devotion is what helps us heal the most. If this story touched something in you, maybe it's time to look a little closer at the four-legged friend already curled at your feet. There's a whole world behind their eyes, of memory, instinct, and quiet loyalty, just waiting to be understood. If you'd like to deepen that connection, I came across a thoughtful little resource that shares gentle ways to build trust, purpose, and even healing routines with your dog. No pressure at all, just something that felt right, and I figured you might appreciate it too. Because in the end, it's not about training tricks. It's about listening, showing up, and choosing each other. Every day, take care of them and let them take care of you too.